One. Town Board, we are live.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the March 15th work session of the East Hampton Town Board. Carol, would you please read the roll call?
Councilwoman Burke-Gonzalez.
Present.
Councilman Leaf.
Present.
Councilwoman Overby.
Here.
Councilwoman Rogers.
Present.
Supervisor Van Scoyac.
Present. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic
For which it stands,
one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This morning, we have a very full agenda. We'll start with a public portion where any member of the public may address the board on any topic. We ask that you mute any devices you may be listening to the meeting on in the background so that we don't get feedback, and that you please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. But we also have, I think 7 agenda topic items. We'll be doing bids with Jeannie Carrozza, our purchasing agent. We'll be discussing a revised outdoor dining legislation, presentation of the State Environmental Quality Review Act process and purpose, the personal wireless communications proposed tier review procedure, additional amendment to Chapter 167 littering, amendments to the town code for Chapter 109 peddling, in addition to the town code Chapter 102 building construction, surveys, staking of clearing, followed by liaison reports and resolutions. But at this time, I would like to announce that after just over 2 years, I will be rescinding the emergency declaration due to COVID, as well as the executive orders that were filed to allow for relaxation of our zoning code, specifically with regard to outdoor dining. We are going to be discussing permanent changes to the town code to allow for more outdoor dining, very similar to what we've allowed during COVID. Friday the 13th, March 2020 was a day that I think we'll all remember. And I'm really excited that things are looking up now, finally, after 2 very long years. This has been a trying time for all of us. I know that many have struggled with income, with schooling, you name it. It's changed our life in every single way. And we've gotten through to this point because people cooperated with each other. We worked together as a community. We came together to meet the needs of those who were most at risk and who were most needy. And I think we can all feel good about what we've done together. And I think it's a tribute to the willingness of people to come together in time of need. And it's something we should not forget. And there will be plenty of other opportunities for us to work together and take care of each other. So at this point, I'm really excited to be announcing rescinding those orders. If we can now go to the phone lines. Jason, do you have any callers on the line?
Mr. Supervisor, we currently have no callers on the line, even though I'm calling with my cell phone. So, lines are up and operational, but we have no callers.
Okay. Very good. Can we go to Jeannie Carrozza? Jeannie, are you in the waiting room?
She's in the waiting room and coming in right now. And Jeannie, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Right on.
Okay.
Good morning, Jeannie.
Good morning, everybody. Quite a few things this morning. First, starting with the acceptance of the bid for Star Island Dock Rehabilitation. Keith Grimes is the apparent low bidder for that one, and the $1,572,748.10. Several extensions. First is the Hampton hopper for the commuter extension service that will be starting April 1st. Extension of supply and delivery of Jet A with additive and 100 low lead fuel for the airport. That's with Ascent Aviation Group, and that extension will be for 6 months. Next is the supply and delivery of Hino truck parts with Gabrielli. Supply and delivery of international truck parts with Syosset Truck Sales. Then we are also extending the household hazardous waste collection days with Radiac Environmental Services. Those are the stop days at sanitation. And lastly, we have a few notices coming up. Westlake Comfort Station, the new foundation for that. Westlake Comfort Station, the new IA sanitary system. And we'll also be doing an RFP for delinquent fines and penalties collection. And that's it.
Thank you, Jeannie. Any questions for Jeannie?
No, thank you.
Thanks so
Thank
much, Jeannie. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Okay, our next agenda item is revised outdoor dining legislation. As I mentioned, we first began 2 years ago looking at ways to help local businesses and the general public to be able to dine safely and keep those businesses operational. And we've relaxed some of the current zoning restrictions to allow for that. And as I just announced, we're going to be rescinding that order today. But during this time, we've had multiple discussions with our business committee. Sylvia's been the liaison to that committee. And there's been a great deal of discussion and work on crafting legislation that will allow for up to 100% of a restaurant's capacity to be placed outdoors. Sylvia, would you like to take it from here?
Sure, I'll just introduce this because we've seen this at the last work session as we went through it, and we are allowing for 100% depending on your zoning.
I'm so sorry, Sylvia. I just got a message. Are we on air, Jason, right now?
Oh.
Jason?
We were been streaming out onto the YouTube. Give me a second. My apologies. We went off air off the broadcast, but our YouTube live stream has been up. I apologize again.
Does that mean we're not on channel 22?
We are currently on channel 22. I just changed their settings. My apologies. We are currently on right now. Thank you.
Okay. And is Rick Whalen in the waiting room? Do you know?
No, he's
I've
not.
sent him an email with the Zoom link, but
He's
anyway.
not in the waiting room yet.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Sylvia. Thank you very much.
Yes, no worries. So, as I said, we've seen this before. This is an update that we talked about last week, and we're just trying to get it right so we can make sure that it's, ready for prime time when we everyone gets together in April and May to start hopefully outdoor dining. Maybe not April. So anyway, I don't know, John, if you want to talk about it, Jeremy, if you want to, or does the town board have any questions? I think that the difference that we saw here is that it's now, as Rick Whalen was putting this together, is in the actual outdoor dining legislation and in that section of the code. So there's not two competing sections of the code, which looked like what was going to happen as we had written it originally. So now it's integrated within the code. And I need Jeremy to talk about it and John to also say, that this is going to work and that we can, notice it for a public hearing, hopefully on Thursday. And if there are any questions that the town board has, please let us know.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that we touched on in the last work session that I think's maybe been addressed in this most recent draft was the issue of pre-existing non-conforming. Mm-hmm. And that language reflects the fact that they would not be eligible for the issuance of a transfer of outdoor dining through an administrative permit. I don't recall if there were any other major issues that we really changed or addressed.
So we did come down on a time frame, which is this pilot program will be good for 3 years.
Yep.
And at that time, then we can, and up and through that whole time, we can look and see how this program is working and if we need to adjust it in any way. Jeremy, you may want to talk about what restaurants are already allowed to have by right. And so we're not taking anything away. We're just adding to.
Correct. So good morning, everyone. Pleasure to see you all and work on this. So basically, I think as many of you know, there was an existing section of code that allowed for up to 30% of a restaurant's existing seating to be moved outdoors. And this was not an additional seating option. This was a swap out. So you literally moved up to 30% from inside to outside. And that was subject to review by fire marshal in particular. And there were certain triggers in there that could get you into a site plan review process if some of those triggers got tripped. So what we have now is that section of code continues unaltered. So it is exactly as it was before. There is no change to that. But it was observed by Rick rather, wisely, I think, that we didn't want to have that live in one section of the code and then have a different section of the code that had a very similar name and set of objectives attached to it for outdoor dining, which is what you all discussed last time. So while we have to do the sort of formal merging of these two, Rick has laid it out in a way that they're sequential in the code that now starts with that existing 30% opportunity for restaurants that would like to go down that road. If folks want to go beyond that and aim at something up to 100%, this is the proposed legislation that you all discussed last week. These two pieces have now, exactly as Councilwoman Overby said, have been placed next to each other in the code so that there's no confusion, sort of what circumstance applies to one and what circumstance applies to the other.
Are there any additional comments or questions about the legislation?
John, do you want to weigh in, John, and then tell us what we can do on Thursday?
Yeah, we could notice this for hearing. I just wanted to also note that there was discussion about the tent regulations. So basically, this has been adjusted to coordinate with the existing regulations of the code. It doesn't allow for any additional rights with regard to tents. And I guess, we can look at that as this moves forward, but didn't want to create a situation where we had people who were putting up tents for the season, with under this administrative type of a process. They need to get their tent permit from the fire marshal. It's good for a 2-week period, go up, they can take it down, they can put it back up when they need it again. Or they can come in for site plan for something more substantial if that's what they want to do. But this legislation doesn't change that. That was one of the topics we were also discussing.
Correct.
Otherwise, I think it's good to go for public hearing and comment.
Great.
John, board members, anything else before we move on?
I'm comfortable the way it's drafted and would like to hear from the public on it.
Great.
And I think the 3 years that's on there gives us enough of a test segment to see if we want to make any changes there. And it also allows for merchants and property owners to invest and know that they can amortize it over a couple of years if they need to buy chairs or such. So I think that gives them some comfort level there too. Thank you, Sylvia, and everyone for working on it.
And a big thank you, not only to the business committee, because they really hashed this out for many months. They've been hashing it out, and the discussions have been, everywhere from heated to loving. So anyway, and thank John and thank Rick Whalen a lot for getting this done. Jeremy, thank you for all your advice as well. So we'll move forward on Thursday. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And while we have you on the line here, Jeremy, our next topic is presentation of secret process and purpose. And as many know, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, which I think became law in 1976, maybe, requires that municipalities, as well as individuals or businesses that are seeking to take certain actions, that those actions have to be reviewed and you have to take a hard look at what the potential environmental impacts might be from doing that, taking that action. So this is a bit of a refresher course for the general public, I think, and for the town board members probably as well, although we have spent a great deal of time working on SECRA for many of the projects that we've proposed, dealing with everything from cell towers to airport. So I think this will be helpful for the general public to better understand the constraints that we and the public are under because of this legislation, and our requirements and obligations and responsibilities. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jeremy, to walk us through what SECRA is and why we do it.
Well, thank you, and a pleasure to share this, because this is the world that the crew that I work with here in the planning department lives in, and we rely on the attorney's office. We rely on the various boards around town to, including yourselves, to help us sort of execute here. But I'll get into the details of that, in the slide presentation. So, if it's possible to put up the slides, please, I'll go ahead and walk us through this. Give me a second. And just while we're getting that sorted, apologies, there's a bit of a technical issue here. So I'm having an issue on my end. Is somebody able to put those up?
Yeah, let me see if I can find it real quick.
Yeah. So those.
You get it yet?
Not yet.
If you want, you can send it to me and I can screen share.
Okay. All right. I'd offer to sing, but that would drive down viewership. So. All right.
No public comment today, so we may not have any viewers. You never know.
All right.
It might be just too nice of a day.
Yeah.
And spring is coming, right? Just next week. Is it Monday, first day of spring?
I think that's right.
Sunday or Monday, I think.
Okay. All right, here we go. I think I found a workaround here. Let's see if this is going to let me. Yeah, there's a problem with the content on my end. I don't understand why. So if one of you, I believe you all have it. If
do you want to let Eric Shanson? I think he might have the plans ready.
Yeah, that would be great. I will.
Jeremy can share screen, or Eric can do it, whatever works. I have it open.
Okay. Kate, if you've got it and want to just throw it up, that would be fantastic.
Here we go.
All right. Thank you all. I appreciate that, and I apologize for the delay. All right. So let me get back over.
By the way, we may be going back into in-person meetings as early as Thursday, day after tomorrow, and while that won't negate the possibility of technical problems, it may reduce the frequency that we've experienced in the last 2 years. So that's another bright spot that we can look forward to.
There you go. It won't make me any brighter, but it might help with the technology woes. All right. So just right off the bat, I want to sort of clarify why we've labeled as we have, SECRA as opposed to SECRA. And it's just a stumbling block sort of, planning nerd kind of stuff. The State Environmental Quality Review Act actually refers to the piece of legislation So you'll hear people just use that term generically, but I've been asked this question a couple of times recently. Why do we sometimes see it with the shorter designation of the SEQR, State Environmental Quality Review, as opposed to the Act? And the Act just refers to the legislation, and it's just easier to pronounce. There's a vowel in there, so people just generically refer to it as SEQRA. The takeaway for folks at home is it's all the same thing. Feel free to use either one. There is no distinction, just in sort of lay conversation. SEQRA, I would ask people to understand it, is really intended to incorporate environmental factors into an agency's decision-making process as early as possible. And I'll talk a little bit in a moment about what we mean by environmental factors. But the point here is really we're trying to identify what concerns may be associated with a specific proposal for development or legislation or funding, any type of action that may come out of a town board or a municipal agency or a private landowner's desires here really needs to be part of a process that is well articulated and has measurable steps along the way so that everybody can follow along and understand what we're up to and why, and what the right moments are where they can make sure to show up and have their voices or concerns or ideas shared as part of that. The intent here is to seek a balance between the impacts that any project may have and our shared desire to protect the physical environment, the natural world around us, and make sure that we're also balancing simultaneously any need for access or enhancement or preservation to community resources. And I'll describe in a moment a little bit better what examples of those types of things are. Impacts that we're being asked to think about here as we use this tool, those can be things that happen during a construction phase of a project. So if we just think of a very simple, I'm going to build a large facility for, commercial retail here, making up an example. There could be impacts that need to be understood and assessed for while the construction is happening. Or while a project is being implemented. That's one set of impacts that need to be assessed here and understood and reviewed through SEQRA. But there's also legacy impacts or things that will always be true for a property or may be true for a particular project or property that's going through SEQRA. Those are things like traffic, for example. So if in the first example you think of construction impacts, there could be noise and air pollution and impacts to groundwater, impacts to the character of a neighborhood that are limited in scope to the actual construction phase of this. And those would need to be understood under SEQRA. But also, once the project actually gets built, there are additional impacts that, may just, even after those initial impacts go away, the community may be asked to understand what those are through the SEQRA process as well. Next slide, please. So I want to be very clear right up front here that even though this piece of very important legislation is called the State Environmental Quality Review Act, environment here has a very broad meaning. And yes, it means exactly what I think many people would assume it means, which is, trees, flora, fauna, air quality, groundwater, surface water. Those are all things that need a hard look. And that's a term that'll come up again. But those are things that need a hard look through this legislation to make sure that we are protecting them or offsetting any impacts to them in the best way possible. But in addition, there's a broader use of the term environment here, which actually includes many other things. And so it's really a generic use of the term environment to mean all of the things around you. And so, yes, all of the natural resources that we just articulated. But in addition to that, there are impacts and that we need to understand, or potential impacts that we need to understand that could be part of the human landscape, the physical landscape. They could be agricultural. They could be social, economic, historical, or even aesthetic. And so, for example, if we have an area that has a historic district, then that's the kind of thing that would be recognized through the SEQRA process. And we would want to make sure that any project, if it triggers a more formal review here, that we were actually taking into account what the impacts to any of the items on this list might be. So we might have a community park that could be, greatly impacted by a proposal for the property next door to it. And we would want to understand, how is the community impacted? How are the people in this neighborhood or this town impacted if we take if we allow or move forward with a proposal on one property? What's the almost inevitable or even potential impact that might happen to a community asset or resource? So I'll ask you all to jump in with any questions if you have them as we go. I'll pause there for a moment and see if you want to steer this one way or the other before we go to the next slide.
Any questions at this point for Jeremy?
All right. So next slide, please. So the next two slides are what is SECRA and what is SECRA not, right? So SECRA it's actually a process. So it is not a means unto itself. There is no sort of golden prize at the end of SECRA that results in a permit. It's actually, if you think of it as sort of a layer that gets put on top of the review that might be done by something like a planning board. And I realize that may be a confusing way to describe it, but it's really a tool that different agencies, so town boards, planning boards, zoning boards, are required under state law to use to make sure that their decision-making process discharges their responsibility fully to understand what impacts could be and then describe them and then make sure that there are any appropriate mitigation or offsets are taken into account. So SECRA is not a means unto itself. It is really if you think of it almost as a map or a guide that agencies have to use, are required to use in New York State. This is a piece of New York State legislation. It doesn't apply in other states. There are different similar rules that apply over there. But within New York, when we have these projects come forward, we're required to use this tool, or at least to make sure that we have gone through the steps of seeing whether a deeper look using this tool is required. And I'll speak more to that in a moment. The intent of this process is to identify possible impacts and then describe appropriate mitigation for potential impacts. Another huge benefit of this piece of legislation is that it does what's called coordinating review. And so, folks who are fans of Channel 22 will know that, oftentimes you'll have a particular application. Let's use an example of development on a given piece of property that actually requires more than one agency within the town, for example, to take a look at it. So you might have an application that starts with the planning board, but then also has a zoning board component to it. And in some cases may even find itself eventually in front of the architectural review board. Or by contrast, you might have a application that is seeking to do something along our shoreline in East Hampton town that finds itself before the zoning board because that's where they need relief. But actually, New York State obviously has a bunch of rules and regulations that would similarly apply to that application, whether those are stricter standards or less stringent standards. There is a need to coordinate the review between these agencies. So this map or this process that SECRA lays out for us really makes sure that we have accurately and adequately described who should have a say here based on what the rules of the road are, what the various layers of governmental review are here. And so oftentimes we will find that we will have a local board that is in charge of an application, and we'll speak more about that in a second. They're what's known as the lead agency that then needs either a formal look or at least a sign off to say it's okay on our end from another agency. It could be Department of State, it could be Department of Transportation, it could be Department of Environmental Conservation is the one that we probably see most often. But there is literally a requirement to coordinate review here. And I think this benefits all of us because what we don't want to see happen is we get partway or all the way through a review process, and then we find out that there was an agency or an organization that should have been at the table or should have been allowed to offer guidance with the idea that there were either rules we need to follow or there were recommendations that that particular set of experts could have offered to the process that we are now missing out on because we did not coordinate review. So a requirement of this piece of legislation is to coordinate review always. So the goal of all of this is to make sure that we get a comprehensive assessment of a project's impacts. And as I said before, this particular set of rules, SECRA, happens to apply to all of us in New York State that are doing these projects. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but I want to spell out for us that we have a national set of standards that are a similar environmental review process that come into play when we're dealing with an organization, for example, like the Army Corps of Engineers. So we actually have multiple review processes that have to be coordinated with each other. But in our case, the fact that something went through environmental review for a federally funded project, for example, doesn't necessarily mean that we don't also need to do a SECRA process. And so we see this right now in East Hampton Town with the inlet dredging project that the Army Corps of Engineers has come forward with. Because this project is not just the routine maintenance dredging that has happened over time, but because this is a bigger, longer term fix that's needed here, the federal review of the project that was required for this does not actually substitute for the town's responsibility to make sure that we are also fulfilling our responsibility under the state requirements here. So sometimes that plays out a little differently, but I just wanted folks to be aware that there are parallel processes and we're always having to calibrate and assess which is it an either or either in a given circumstance, or is it a both? And more often than not, we find that it's a both, depending on what the specific actions are that are being proposed. Next slide, please. So what SECRA is not, it's not a permit. I think a lot of times when people enter into these conversations, they assume that what happens here is somebody goes through SECRA and that SECRA then is the permission that is needed for a property owner or an agency to do a project. And in fact, it's not. It's, as I described a moment ago, it's really the process that we use to navigate the conversation to figure out what the impacts are and whether something, whether the agency that is reviewing it has all of the necessary information to actually make a decision. And so using a specific example here, if there is a project that is before the East Hampton Town Planning Board, what we will see is that SECRA is the map that gets them, to understand who should be involved in this review, what are the questions that should be asked, who's actually going to provide the answers to those questions, and then to take all of that information and to put it together into a series of documents that we'll talk about in a moment, so that in this example, the planning board can then understand whether or not its responsibility to review a project and uphold our local zoning code is adequate within the current circumstance. So what I mean by that is SECRA is a process that gets discharged so that it can inform the decision that is actually going to be required of, in this example, the planning department, so they can decide whether or not they're going to approve or not approve. SECRA is not the approval or the denial. It is the process that informs the agency's review of a project. So important to note here, SECRA is not something that has its own built-in enforcement mechanism. There's not the SECRA police out there. The way that this actually gets enforced over time is if somebody has an objection to either the procedure that was employed in doing SECRA, or believes that there was an error in the determination that was rendered here, then the default position, the way to object, is for somebody to appeal to the courts. So there is not an appeal mechanism locally. Or at a regional scale. You literally go to New York State Supreme Court, which the nomenclature of which often trips up people because the Supreme Court, of course, in New York State is where you start. with these things. It's not, a higher division such as the appellate division. So very important that people understand when we're talking about SECRA, the intent here is not to understand or to articulate every single possible or conceivable impact that may be attached to a project. There's a standard of reasonableness here that says, what can we reasonably expect would be some impacts that might be associated with a project? If we clear a particular piece of land, if we build a certain number of units, if we add a certain amount of traffic, if we do these things, what could we reasonably expect would be the impacts from that? The point here is that there is, while an expansive, a nonetheless limited universe of questions that can be answered. And we'll get to when the appropriate moment to raise those questions is in a moment. So as I said before, SECRA is not a substitute for other review. That's the example of federal review that I was mentioning before. So next slide, please. So who uses this process are, in our local example, the town board. So you all, as you know well, with the airport project in particular, you are what is referred to as the lead agency, and I'll give a more detailed description of that in a moment. But essentially, you're in the lead for that review. You're the ones that have said, we think we have the greatest amount of information and the greatest role to play in moving this project forward. So we're going to assign ourselves lead agency status. You send out a letter coordinating, as I mentioned before, with other agencies. You let them know, we're going to take on this project. We think, given the questions that are being asked, that we're the right ones to answer those questions. Please let us know if you don't agree with that. And then there's a process whereby those can get reconciled. So, in local terms, the town board often uses SECRA for many of the actions that you all undertake, all the way right over to, doing your budget. So, we're actually in our office now working with the bonding resolutions that you all have put forward to make sure that SECRA has had a chance to be the filter that those get put through to ensure that is there environmental review that's needed, right? So, a mistake that I think many people make when they talk about SECRA is they assume that if you're, quote, doing SECRA, which is just kind of a lay way that people describe this, they assume that that means there's a full, robust environmental review that goes along with whatever, action somebody is putting forward here. But by contrast, what it actually means is that every time you're taking an action, you're asking yourself the question, is this something that should be subject to SECRA? And if it is, which path within the law should it go down? We'll show a flow chart in a couple minutes that kind of spells some of that out. But for the town board's part, you all have a responsibility to make sure that the actions you're taking aren't going to have a bunch of either known or unknown consequences that could have an impact to the character of a community, generating traffic, impacting air quality, impacting groundwater, the quality of people's lives, aesthetic or cultural resources. And you have to have the planning department step in and say, okay, we're here to help you with that. Let us do that, filtering of this particular action that you're taking and hand it back to you with an assessment that says, yes, this either rises for further review or it doesn't. So the top two bullets there, town board and planning department, we're very often using these. In addition, the folks under the next set of bullets, review boards, planning board, zoning board of appeals, architectural review board, and the trustees, all within the town context at various points have to ask themselves, an application or an action that is in front of us right now, does it trigger a more detailed review? And even if it doesn't, you actually have to stare at it and demonstrate that, no, we took a look and it doesn't meet these minimum triggers for more detailed review. And that gets documented as part of any application. In addition, regional governments and agencies such as the Suffolk County Planning Commission would also have a role to play in more regional scale projects, for example, where they might be that lead agency that I was describing before. And so, again, the coordination comes into play. And obviously state agencies as well. So as I mentioned before, Department of State, Department of Transportation, DEC in particular, those are frequent flyers, if you will, for using secret as a way to understand and then describe to the public, right? So that's the whole other part of this. And I think it's the real power of this piece of legislation. It is intended to not only help an agency discharge its responsibility, but it's also intended to provide the public with ample opportunity to understand what a given project is, to ask questions about it, and to even, in fact, propose ideas for how the project could be made better, or if they're to flag very specific concerns that describe things that need attention or reasons why a project should not go forward. And of course, we also have the applicants, the people who might be advancing or proposing a project if it's a private property owner. They obviously benefit from this process as well, because it allows them to fully understand what their responsibility is to answer very specific questions that come up, and then actually have a way to move things forward and keep them from getting bogged down and get to that final approval. Next slide, please. So, common terms that often get thrown around when we're talking about SECRA. Action is really anything that is proposed, right? So it could be legislative, it could be, as I said before, it could be a bonding resolution, it could be to build a certain structure in a given place, right? So the action is what gets evaluated under SECRA to allow an agency to decide whether or not it can go forward. So lead agency, as I said before, is whichever of the boards we think has the greatest amount of say over a project, has the greatest amount of authority in determining whether a project should move forward, or what the either constraints or adjustments to a project should be. That organization, so planning board, zoning board, town board, planning commission, any of the folks on the previous slide might be the lead agency for a project. And then by virtue of that, the other involved agencies is a term that gets used. The other involved agencies become essentially subordinate to that lead agency's review. They still get a say, and they retain any right to issue or not issue any permits that may be required from their agency as part of this broader look. But they are not the lead agency that is moving this forward and making sure that the various timelines and responsibilities get fulfilled along the way. Environmental assessment form, you'll see in a moment when we look at this flow chart, that's almost like the intake form here, right? So that's the easy first pass at looking at whether something really needs a deeper look through something that's described at the bottom of the page, the environmental impact statement. So how those determinations get made, should something be subject to an environmental assessment form, really is binary. Well, actually, that's not true. There's sort of three paths that open up early on in this process. There's what's referred to as a type 1 action. And I put 1 in parentheses there because a lot of folks, that we use the Roman numeral and they assume it's a type I or, type II or something for what's referred to as a type 2. No, it's actually referred to as a type 1. And all that really means is that there's a list of things, I think it's like 37 items that say, here's a list of triggers that we know if you're going to propose something like this, it needs more environmental review or likely needs more environmental review. And so those are called out up front. There's a list, and we put those things onto the right path right away. By contrast, sort of the opposite of that are these type 2 actions. And that's where we know that these things do not rise to the level. And so therefore, they get discharged right away. But of course, a list of 30 something items is not all encompassing. And there's this whole gray area in the middle where you say there's a type 1 list and there's a type 2 list, and I'm not on either one. How do I know? And that's where you get to this section called Unlisted Actions. And really all that means is it doesn't exist over here and it doesn't exist over there. We're going to label it as unlisted. And then there's a set of steps that then unfold for determining whether or not something requires a deeper look or further review. Once we get deeper into the process, let's say we've got a type 1, we know that there's a specific trigger here, or we're an unlisted action is a better example, where you say we're in this gray area and we're not sure whether we're going to have to do a really deep dive here and actually prepare an environmental impact statement or a draft environmental impact statement that will kick off this process of more detailed environmental review. This is where you have that fork in the road that says you're either a negative declaration or you're a positive declaration. And so if we can go to the next slide, I think this will make a little more sense here. So here's this flow chart that you've heard me reference a couple of times. And then I know all of you as a town board and all of you as, or many of you as former planning board, zoning board members, leads, et cetera, you all have stared at this chart many a time and you have mapped individual applications through this process. And going all the way over to the left-hand side for folks at home here who are trying to figure out, why and how and all of that. This is where you start. That's an action. As I said before, it could be anything that is proposed for a development scheme, for a piece of legislation, for a funding mechanism. It could be the adoption of a comprehensive plan for the town. Any planning update, anything that is has the potential to greatly affect the lives of people in a community, the natural resources of a community, needs to right up front be screened against that type 1 list I was describing, and the type 2 actions that are also described, or be listed as that third category of unlisted action. And once you begin down this road, then you can see how you would move through a process that under type 2, if you're a type 2 action, then, we know that the state law and the case law that applies here over 40 plus years of people asking, well, what about this? And I'd like to sue over that. We know that there's now a very clear understanding of what are type 2 actions and what types of things don't require further environmental review. And so we put it through the filter that I was describing before. And okay, you're deemed as a type 2 here. Congratulations, please move on with your project. That does not take away the need or the obligation or the legal responsibility to get a building permit, to get any variances that might be required, or to do something like site plan review, right? So in all of those examples, you understand that the board or the agency of the town, the building department, for example, that is helping you get to your approvals for your project, just because you went through SECRA, as I said earlier, you are not now out from under the obligations that you have to do things like get a building permit, right? So that's the example of this being a process that helps us understand where we should land in the environmental review universe, but it does not substitute for. It is an administrative step that happens before the agency can render a final determination on whether you should get a permit or your application should be approved or legislation should move forward, et cetera. So of more interest is at the top of the page where you have the type 1s. So the environmental assessment form that I mentioned earlier, if you follow that box that says type 1 action, that automatically means that if you're deemed a type 1, you not only have to fill out an environmental assessment form, but you got to do the big version of the form. There's a short one and there's a long one. And if you do the long one, then that has more sections to it, and it helps the agency and the applicant and the public understand in greater detail, what do we think we're taking on here? What are the things we need to be concerned about? If you have a unlisted action, you have the option to do the short form environmental assessment form, but many times organizations, agencies, departments like the planning department determine that we actually think we're going to understand where we need to go here more clearly if we do the longer form rather than the short form EAF. So, once you get through the EAF, then you get over to determining who the other agencies are that may be involved. You have a determination of who the lead agency is, if you're doing the full EAF. And then you need to basically get to that moment of positive declaration or negative declaration. And that's referred to as the determination of significance. And you can see here pretty quickly that if you get to that determination of significance and there's a negative declaration, what that really means is that the agencies that are charged with review here have determined that any potential environmental impacts, and potential is a key word in SECRA, right? It's not known environmental impacts or definite environmental impacts. It's potential environmental impacts. Any potential environmental impacts do not rise to the level and cumulatively. So one on top of the other, which is another aspect of secret here. We're constantly asked, any individual action by itself, sure, but if you add another couple of individual actions on top of that, do you cumulatively get to a level where there is enough concern that we're triggering some of those standards that exist for a positive declaration, or are we still seeing this as something that is benign enough that it has, we're able to describe it as determination of significance having a negative declaration? If that's the case, then you actually get to the end of the review process. So in the positive declaration chain here, you get to scoping. And the reason I want to spell out scoping is this is a really important moment for the public to know what's going on, to be involved, to be paying attention, and to listen deeply, right? So the positive declaration means that we are now into this deeper environmental review process, that if the applicant or the agency that is putting forth this project chooses to see it through, then what that means is there will be an environmental impact statement that is prepared. And in order for that big document that is meant to really take a hard look and get to the bottom of what are the things that people are concerned about, what are the potential, again, that word potential, impacts that we all need to be concerned about here, how do we determine what those are going to be? And the answer is scoping. Scoping means you are taking a look around and you are scooping up and creating lists of potential impacts here, and you're trying to understand what those impacts could be. So scoping is a moment where the public in particular, other agencies, the community-based organizations, the applicant, the lead agency, or other boards that are involved in the review, everybody gets to have a say in, putting forward ideas that they think are appropriate for review here. And just because somebody puts it forward, it doesn't mean that that will necessarily be something that gets a deep dive in the final EIS, environmental impact statement. But it does mean that it has been flagged and that the agency now will have to determine whether or not they think that is a legitimate potential impact here, and they'll determine whether that is something that survives on the list of items that have to be assessed deeply as this project moves forward. The reason I really want to draw people's attention to scoping is this is exactly the moment we are in with the airport conversation in East Hampton town right now. So anybody out there who is watching this or reading the newspaper or wants to be involved in the conversation around the airport, now is your moment, right? The window for scoping closes this Friday at 4 p.m. And anybody who has an idea about something that should actually be assessed here or studied or understood more deeply as we move forward needs to please, I'm asking you to take this moment and either call or write, use the email address that the town board has provided several times, and share your ideas for things that need a look. I don't want to put myself in the position of commenting specifically on the airport, but I want to fulfill my responsibility to make sure that the public understands that you have a right, I would even argue a responsibility to participate in this process if you have concerns. And now is a moment. It's not the only moment, but this is a critical moment because, as I said very early in this presentation, the notion that SECR is built on is identify potential impacts and do it early. So, this scoping process that we're in right now is the community's opportunity to say, here's how I think traffic could be associated with a given project, and here's what I think the questions are that you need to answer specific to that. Right? I'm using traffic as an example. There are any number of potential noise, air quality, community character examples that we could look at using the airport, for example, to say, here's the list of questions that need to be asked. And I just want to underline for everybody out there, please participate. Please share your notions and ideas before this Friday, and make sure you're free to comment on process, but process, as you can see here from this flow chart, is largely baked, right? We have to follow these steps and we have to follow them in the appropriate order. We can't deviate from process. There's a requirement in SECR that says we have to literally live up to the letter of the law, and we have to substantively live up to the letter of the law as well. So, Peter, you look like
Jeremy,
you have
if
a
I could
comment.
just interrupt for just a moment, since you brought up the topic of scoping in the airport, and that we are receiving scoping comments through Friday, March 18th at 4 p.m. Those comments can be emailed to ehamptonscope@ehamptonny.gov. And again, it is very important that you participate in this process. This helps the town board in our decision-making process going forward.
Right, and perfect, thank you. And I hope we can repeat that again, maybe for folks. So you grab a pen now, and we'll.
Yeah, I'll say it again during my liaison report, I'm sure.
Perfect. I'm gonna get T-shirts made up. So, from the scoping process, we then move into, in our case, we're actually tracking towards what's called a generic environmental impact statement, and I would urge us to not get tripped up on, the nomenclature of draft environmental impact statement versus generic environmental impact statement. And the point is, the scoping process will identify a bunch of questions that have to be asked and understood. And then we have to go actually generate the information that will allow the agency, in this case, the town board, to render a final set of determinations here about what they want the future of the airport to be. So I think if there's, as I've observed, community conversations and spoken with friends and, folks who are really paying attention here, I think there's this one idea that, folks are sometimes getting hung up on or misunderstand a little bit when it comes to the airport conversation. In order to fully understand what the impacts of any action at the airport might be, then we actually have to study them, right? And so what you all, and I say this to the public, obviously, but what you all as the town board are proposing to do this summer is to identify clearly what the questions are that need to be asked, name the potential impacts here, and then go out and study those in detail so that you can actually make a final set of recommendations and decisions. And I think where the confusion in talking to some of my friends has come in is that people misunderstand the study period of this summer, where we're going to try to do some things and adjust the dials to see, well, if we do, a certain set of, limitations, and I won't go further than that in describing them because that's a different person's job. If we take a certain set of actions this summer that help us understand fully what our ability to actually have a meaningful impact on people's concerns around the impact are. If we do those things, those are not the final actions. Those are not the destination that the community is getting to in terms of here's what the future of the airport will be. That is a process that is allowed for under SECRA so that we can actually understand what potential impacts may be and then make a final set of determinations and recommendations. So I'm not sure I described that very clearly, but I want people, if you take something away from this, or if you take two things away from this today in specific reference to the airport, it's please comment before Friday as part of the scoping conversation. And then the second one is that all of the actions that are being put forward or recommended or considered for this summer are actually things that are time bound. They will expire essentially at the end of the summer. And then all of the information that is learned from that period and the rigorous study that will accompany it will actually be used to come up with a final set of recommendations, right? And in that list of things that must be studied, very important to point out is something called the no action alternative. So if we can actually go to the next slide, please. So, how do we make these very detailed judgments about what the implications for a project might be? Well, the environmental impact statement actually contemplates and uses what are described as alternatives. And we're always required as, so think of it as a spectrum. We could do a bunch of stuff over here, or we could do nothing over here. And then there's probably a couple of points in between where we do a little bit, we do something that looks a little bit different, or we do something that's, a lot bigger, right? So if you think of it as a spectrum, over on one side, there's a no action alternative. In the case of the airport, just to sort of give people some shading and some color around that, that would mean literally we don't do anything different than we're doing right now. What could we reasonably anticipate would be the impacts of doing nothing? And those get described through the conversation and through the generic environmental impact statement that gets prepared. All the way down at the other end of the spectrum, in the example of the airport, and something that the town knows that it will want to take a look at, not because anyone thinks that, the other things that we are required to look at are, what if we do these things in the middle? What if we apply a certain set of restrictions or requirements, all of the PPR pieces, and those get broken out, and people look at those as different alternatives, and those get described, and we study as they're being implemented what the actual impacts of those are. As part of this, in order to fully discharge our responsibility here, we are also needing to describe what the other end of the spectrum looks like. If you have do nothing on this end, then on the other end of the spectrum, you have an obligation to describe what would happen if the airport were closed. And so that is sort of the full spectrum of alternatives that get described here. And just to note, the town could not take action anywhere along that spectrum, with the exception of do nothing, without going through the environmental impact statement process, without fully discharging its responsibility under SECRA. So, I've had my phone ring a bunch of times with people saying, this all feels like, a very complicated process. I wish everybody in town would agree to just close the airport. And the answer is, even if everybody in town woke up tomorrow and decided that that was the path that people were going to go down, that is an action. It is subject to SECRA. There is a mandatory requirement that we go through SECRA and that we understand what the implications or potential impacts of that action might be. So nobody could wake up tomorrow and say, you know what? Yeah, I think everybody here agrees. Let's take a certain action. That is not an option. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to point out that there are many, many resources that are available online to understand in more detail or less detail what SECRA actually is. I think the most helpful one for folks who are just trying to sort of understand what this potentially very complicated piece of legislation is, the simplest one to start with is what I listed there as the SECRA handbook. If you just search New York State SECRA or SECRA handbook in your preferred search engine, you will very quickly land on a page that has all of those things. The SECRA, the SECRA cookbook so I should have listed SECRA cookbook rather than handbook. The handbook is a more detailed version, 100 and something pages. The SECRA cookbook is something like 18 pages or something. It's got a couple of cartoons and graphics in there. And it actually is a very straightforward way to understand what this process is, all of which is summarized in that flow chart that we used earlier. If you're looking for any of these resources in Spanish, in particular, you can use the link that we've provided there that actually is a hyperlink. So if you find this presentation on the town's website through town clerk, then you'll be able to just click on that link and you'll get to a full set of resources in multiple languages. In addition, my team and myself are available to any agency in town, to the public. In seeing that this presentation was on today, I had several people reach out to me and say, well, I hope you're going to address this very specific concern that I have. And the best I could do was to say to those folks, let's pick a time tomorrow, whatever, this week, come on in, sit down, and we'll look at the specifics of the application that you're concerned about. But I wanted today to be more general, but also to let people know that we're here and happy to spend the time that it takes to get them to feel comfortable with this and understand when their opportunities to comment are.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Board members have any questions or comments at this point?
I do want to thank Jeremy for doing this. There's a lot of information that he imparted on us. And if anyone wants to download this slide presentation to understand it better in your spare time, if you want to do this, then please do. And thank you, Jeremy, for pulling this all together and helping everyone understand a little bit about the process.
Yeah, and I would just like to add something for folks that are thinking about why wasn't this done for the export cable for the South Fork Wind Farm, to explain that the town did this type of review. I called it the State Department of Service review for the utility. Secret on steroids was my way of describing it, where there were 32 reviewing agencies, the town and the trustees, all interested parties of the public were part of that process, and it was an intensive review that took 2 full years to complete. So that was an even deeper dive into every single issue than SECRA does. And our jurisdiction was broadened by including what was in the state waters offshore as well, rather than just what is in our jurisdiction. So I just wanted to make that note. And I thank Jeremy also for his detailed explanation.
Thank you, Kate. Anyone else before we move on? Jeremy, thank you so much. Appreciate that. I think this helps folks understand, the process that we're required to go through, as well as many other individuals and agencies have to go through when proposing projects that are considered actions that require a review under SECRA. So again, if you want more information, you can talk to the planning department, or you can go to the town website, find this material, click on the hyperlink, and you can review the SECRA cookbook, handbook, and all the rules and regs. So appreciate that, Jeremy. At this point, I think we have Eric Shantz in the waiting room. If we could bring Eric in. We're going to discuss the personal wireless communications proposed tier review procedure. Under the town code, we review applications for various types of wireless communications projects, and this is part of our comprehensive look at wireless communications master plan, but we thought that we could address this portion of the code and discuss proposed changes here today. The Wireless Communications Committee has met and reviewed these. We've had our outside consultant, Cityscape, working on this project as well. Eric, why don't you take it away and go over those proposed changes to the code?
Sure. And I hope you guys memorized everything from that SECRA presentation. There'll be a quiz on Thursday.
Yeah, actually, Eric, I think we all knew that all along, because
yeah,
pretty much everyone on the board has either served on planning or zoning boards or both. But it's always great to have a refresher, and it can be confusing for the general public. So I don't think we can overemphasize the process.
And Jeremy did a great job of explaining it. I'm actually going to recommend that all the appointed boards watch that presentation as well, just for a refresher.
Sure.
But anyway, so moving along to the next subject. And right at the outset, I'd like to say this is not a presentation that details the cumulative, the entirety of the changes that we're looking to do to wireless. You'll see that at the end of the presentation, where I outline, that this is a short-term step, just the topic I'm speaking about today, but there's also medium-term and long-term efforts that we're working on, most notably updating the wireless master plan, which was adopted over 20 years ago, which is in great need of an update, and then in turn, revising the town code, whether it be standards that we want, wireless facilities to meet, visual, location, design, things of that sort. But basically what I'm here to talk about is a short-term fix, which is a change to the actual application process itself. So hopefully you can see my screen in this PowerPoint presentation. And getting into it, if I can get that to cooperate, there we go. So the reasons that we're doing this, and again, right now what we're talking about, we're focusing on what's required in terms of review. What are the layers of review? Do applicants need, based on the type of application that they have, Do they need to get a building permit? Do they need to go to the planning department? Do they need to go in front of the planning board and the architectural review board? What are the layers of review? The biggest impetus for this is the federal regulations that are relatively new, that affect what a local municipality can do as far as what's required. They also require certain timeframes to be met when a town is reviewing an application. I touched upon the fact that the wireless code is very much outdated, both in terms of present realities in the town as well as technology. And then really we've had some difficulties implementing the code and enforcing our standards, both in terms of inefficiency just because of the way our code is worded and not meshing with those other regulations. But also, we want to make sure that we're still having the same standard of review that the town wants for applications, at least as far as what our authority is to require certain things. And then I'll get into this a little bit more in the next slide, but our definitions in the town code are very ambiguous, as is our level of review. The way that the code is worded is very ungainly, is not very clear as to what is required of an applicant. And then again, as you know, Cityscape is our wireless consultant. They have recommended that we make changes. As you'll see through the presentation, I go through some very specific recommendations, and Cityscape has said that they support them. Basically, what I've done, what the planning department has done, is take Cityscape's original recommendations to change the review process, tweak it a little bit, and just kind of give you guys a general overview. After that will come specific code recommendations as for specific language for the code that Cityscape will craft with our assistance. So right now our code is based on the concept of tiering, which is basically a way of structuring the level of potential impact that an application might have, from lowest to most severe or most significant. Tier 1, the definition, and I won't read these verbatim here, but basically Tier 1 are small cell installations. They're installations that are mounted on utility poles. Tier 2 applications are the majority of the applications we get. They're swap outs, they're new antenna installations on existing support structures, such as a water tower or a cell tower. Tier 3 are basically new applications. Obviously, those are the most, require the most intensive level of scrutiny and review. The so-called macro sites, which are lattice towers, monopoles, things of that sort. And I have a little red asterisk here, and you can see that at the bottom. Those definitions that I provided you are from the definition section of the town code of the zoning chapter. There's actually, there's one very specific other section of the town code, and then another that alludes to tiering that gives a completely different definition, completely different wording, and includes different applications. I don't need to point out that that is confusing and is something that really needs to be remedied. It's really important too, to narrow the scope of review for an application in order so that the town can get the review that they feel is required, and the level of review based on the type of the application. So just to give you some visual examples, as I just said, Tier 1 are utility pole mounted fixtures, or antennas, I should say, and equipment. This is a rendering that was done by a company called Extenet. This is, you can probably tell if you look here, this is in downtown Montauk, the western end of downtown Montauk. You can see the gas station there. The town has only reviewed these in town right-of-ways. Most of them are in roadway right-of-ways. Most of the ones that exist in the town are in the state right-of-way of Montauk Highway. The town does not have jurisdiction over those. I will get to that in more detail as we go through. Tier 2, this is actually an older photo of the tower here at Town Hall. But basically, as I said, this is a swap out of antennas, or if a new carrier wanted to come at another location on this tower and add equipment. But really, we're focusing here on the actual equipment itself, just to give you a visual. And then Tier 3 applications are new towers. This is actually a tower that is coming down in Montauk to be replaced as part of the emergency services communication upgrades. But Tier 3, again, is basically a new macro site or primary support structure. So right now, this is basically what the code says. Again, this is somewhat open to interpretation because the code is not very clear. This is my wording here to try and explain the review process clearly. This is not taken verbatim from the code, but basically for Tier 1 right now, again, small cell and utility pole mounted, that's basically an administrative process. That's the way it's worded in the code. The planning department is really basically just supposed to review these and, issue a permit. From what we've heard from our attorneys and from Cityscape, there really isn't very much in the way of, what we can require. There isn't really much discretion that the town has over these, but again, something that I'll touch in more detail. Tier 2, which are the majority of the applications we have, are required right now to go to planning board work session meetings. Sometimes that's more than one, depending upon the nature of the application. This is good that the public just had a little primer on SECRA. These are usually type 2 actions that are exempt. Again, they're mostly swap outs or what we call co-locations on existing towers. They rarely require public hearings. And the ARB is empowered by the code in an advisory capacity. Tier 3, again, the most important. These are reviewed by the planning board always. They are usually unlisted or type 1 actions, depending upon the nature of the proposal. There's always a public hearing, and we require ARB approval for those applications. So this is just a graph here that I updated recently that I've been maintaining for a while. This, I will note that this doesn't include small cell applications. The town, a lot of people will have noticed that equipment has gone up on many utility poles, particularly in the Napeak stretch. But again, those are exempt from town jurisdiction. They're in a state right-of-way. So we have actually only had 4 small cell applications. They've all been within the past 2 years. This graph doesn't include that. But what you can see, really, there's 2 things as you're looking at this. And the next slide kind of summarizes that. This is basically the past 20 years since we adopted legislation requiring review of wireless applications. Basically, most of the applications we have are swap outs. They're Tier 2 applications. It's about 82% of the applications that we've had. And then I guess if I go back, you'll see that there's a steady progression here. We've had an increase in the number of wireless applications over the past 20 years. So basically, our goals with these proposed revisions are, first of all, we want to continue the standard of review that the town wants for wireless applications. Yes, there are federal regulations that handcuff the town at times and require, expedited review of certain applications. But if there's, standards, again, design, location, height, fall zone, things of that sort that the town wants to continue, we want to continue those standards. That is going to be more involved with the wireless master plan update when we get into the specific special permit standards for wireless. But that's a goal of these changes, and I don't think that they change that or lessen that standard of review. We also want to reduce the unnecessary review in front of the planning board of simple swap outs, which they basically rubber stamp. I've had, more than one planning board member say, look at it, it's a swap out, it's almost one for one. Say, why are we reviewing this? As long as there's not an impact on the structural capacity of a tower, and as long as there's really no substantive change to the aesthetic appearance of the tower, it's really just inefficient and a waste of the time of the planning board, who has other, more important matters to review. So again, the ever-present requirement to coordinate with the federal regulations is part of this. And then really a big part of it is clarifying the review process and clarifying the definition of the tiers in the town code. Because again, You could look in various different sections of the code right now and come up with a completely different idea of what tier a particular project is. So this is basically a summary of what our proposed changes are. Again, on the left-hand side, you'll see the current definitions for tiers. The main change here would really be in tier 2. Again, from one of those earlier slides, that is the majority of the applications that we get. Most of them are very minor. There's basically no change proposed right now to tier 1. Tier 1 would still be utility pole mounted small cell applications. Tier 2 would include all swap outs, all co-locations, and new antennas on existing support structures. It's largely the same as the way that we've reviewed these applications and the way that we've tiered them. But as you can see, if you swap over to the left-hand margin there, the definition is personal wireless service facilities on pre-existing structures that were legally permitted previously by the town. That doesn't mention swap outs. It doesn't mention equipment change. It doesn't mention ground level equipment changes, such as, changing the electrical equipment that might be in a utility shed. That's something that we want to clarify here. And then again, highlighting the fact that this level, what we're talking about, at the present time, is not really a major change to the code. We're really not changing the level of scrutiny that we would have on tier 3 applications or new cell towers. So basically, this is the key thing here. This is the change to the actual permitting structure and review process that we're proposing. And again, this is really a foot back in the door to ramping up the review and the replacement of our wireless master plan. I'd like the board to have a discussion about whether or not they agree with this permit structure. And then from there, we're going to craft code for this. And then we're going to dive deeper into the bigger issues. But so again, I'm reiterating with tier 1, it's really an administrative approval from the planning department. The planning department does have the discretion to send those applications to the planning board. And we, in fact, have done that with the only 4 applications that we've had jurisdiction over, simply because they're new. We know the public has concerns over small cell and the type of technology that is there. We're starting to establish aesthetic standards as far as what we want to see the design look like. So we have sent those to the planning board. But really, the way the code is currently structured, it would just be an administrative approval. And if you go to the right-hand margin, what we're proposing at this point that it basically be a building permit. The real reason for that and removing the planning department administrative review is that we really don't have much of a say in or any discretion in what those are going to be. As long as they demonstrate FCC compliance, we've been told from our attorneys and from Cityscape that basically, the town could adopt a design standard. There's really kind of 3 different ways that you could design these. You could have a conical antenna structure at the top of the utility pole, which was actually the picture that I showed you as a representative of tier 1 earlier. You could also mount the antennas flush to the top of a utility pole, or you could have them above the utility pole, but in a non-enclosed structure where they're just panel antennas back to back, usually 3 of them. I prefer the conical enclosed, design that basically would, if you paint it the same color as the utility pole, looks like an extension of it. But that's really the only thing that the town has discretion over. And if they do, if we do adopt a standard of design, it basically becomes a rubber stamp under the federal.
Correct. Isn't that we had some issues with the shot clock on those ones?
Absolutely.
On that design. So, if we get that standard design or vernacular, or how I don't think it's a vernacular, it's a design. We would be prepared to be able to move those forward without risking the chance of the town not having a say, even though it's sort of outside of our approval methods. Is that correct?
Exactly. And that's the idea here. I mean, technically, the town has 2 weeks to approve such an application, which is not a very long time frame. And, like, as you're saying, David, if we adopt a design standard, it's basically if you submit this, you submit FCC compliance, you get a building permit. And that's the idea here. That really doesn't lessen in any way what we can require already, or what we do require. So I think that improves efficiency and also helps us meet that time constraint. So
I personally think it'd be important to develop a design standard that the board supports. And anybody else have a comment on that particular aspect? Having a design standard so that it becomes completely administrative, but we know that those installations are in keeping with the aesthetic that we are seeking.
I agree, Peter. I think that's very important.
And that is something. Oh, I'm sorry. Yep.
I was just going to say that I would support that as well. I mean, I was just actually going on the website to see if I could find the poll results, because we know that the community wants us to expedite this process because we need to improve our wireless service here. So, and this is a way forward, and I think it makes a lot of sense to do an administrative permit for Tier 2 applications.
And I'm told that we can codify that, and it is enforceable. The town does have the authority to adopt an aesthetic or design standard for those facilities, put it in the code, and it's a requirement of the applicants that they comply with it. And I don't think that you're going to get any pushback from that. Their concern is more when we don't meet the time frames of review. That's when things become litigious. And we did have litigation involving that company that I was mentioning that had submitted those small cell applications, and it wasn't based on any design requirement. It was based on the fact that we had not processed their application in what their understanding of the law was a timely fashion. So Tier 2, again, mostly swap outs, mostly co-locations. Right now, they are required by the code to go in front of the planning board for at least one work session. Again, the review rarely goes much further than that. Sometimes there's a public hearing. There's rarely an EAF done for SECRA. But basically, what we would propose, what we've been doing since Cityscape has been hired, we've been referring all applications to Cityscape. They've been preparing reports and dealing with the applicants and basically working to get a complete application. That is all the submission requirements, which is, first of all, FCC compliance with radio frequency emissions, a structural analysis if one is needed based upon the age and the overloading of a structure, and also reviewing it to make sure that it's in compliance with certain design standards of the town code, which include, the distance antennas can protrude from a support structure. But basically, they've been working with the applicants, getting a complete application. Once they have that, they've been preparing a report and basically saying the applicants demonstrated compliance with all the standards, planning board approved this. That's fine. And we propose to continue having Cityscape or any other consultant review the applications, because those are important things, in particular the structural analysis. But this, we would propose, would be an administrative review. So long as Cityscape, as wireless consultants and professionals, have been saying that the application should be approved to the planning board has been taking that recommendation. So I don't know that it's necessary to send applications that are swap outs or co-locations to the planning board. I don't think that it is. They've basically gone on the recommendation of our experts. I think that that's the prudent thing to do. And I think that a lot of the planning board's workload, as far as reviewing wireless applications, again, 82% of them are essentially swap outs, could be removed or reduced by making this an administrative permit that would be granted by the planning department or another town agency or department, depending upon what the town board would like to do. But we think that that's probably the most efficient way to do it.
So Eric, the planning board, they don't really have a lot of leeway in terms of, approval denial, do they really?
No, and that's exactly why we're kind of.
Exactly. I think that's the point we just have to drive home here, is that having a review board basically look at something that they have really no ability to regulate is a waste of, I think, everybody's time and resources.
Yeah, agreed. And you're right. That's one of the main focuses of what we're proposing right here. So
the administrative process would still take into account whether or not this has an impact on the structural integrity of the existing tower, which is an important thing to look at. We know that there's so much demand for the ability to add antennas that without engineering review and follow-up, that it's possible that a tower could get overloaded. I think that's really the one major concern when reviewing these types of applications.
Yeah, for sure. And anytime that tower or support structure happens to be a town-owned facility or on a town property, we've also been consulting with Eddie Schnell, the police department's communications technician expert, just to make sure that the structural analysis matches what he knows to be the reality of the equipment that is on that tower. So we've really had 3 levels of review between myself, my department, and Cityscape and Eddie before it's even getting to the planning board. So we've been making sure that the applications are compliant with all the applicable standards. So as you say, I think it is a waste of time.
Are board members comfortable with this proposal for Tier 2? You have any other comments or questions about Tier 2?
Peter, I would just say that just to make clear to the public that this is the Tier 2 does not include any new towers. It includes just replacing antennas that are already on existing towers that have been through the process in kind and place, or by adding an additional antenna. And I agree with you. I agree with this system. I think it's a better system and will give the planning board, more time to deal with the items under their control, rather than just having to go through a function or a process that they can't change and is really a rubber stamp process. I think this would be a better review, actually, if it changed to this process. And especially with adopting design standards and including the structural analysis. I think those are the 2 key items there.
Thank you, Kate. Anyone else? Okay.
So, so the Tier 3 is pretty simple. There's really no change. This is a full review in front of the planning board. This includes projects that have been reviewed recently that people across the town might know about, as well as ones that are pending, such as the application at St. Peter's Chapel, which has been reviewed and is going through a process. We reviewed the new tower at the Northwest Brush Dump property on Bull Path. I understand there is an application coming in soon at Camp Blue Bay. We anticipate that one within the coming months. That would go through the full review process as a Tier 3 application. There would be no change to that. There would certainly be public input. And it would, those projects, all of those are examples of ones that would be actions that would be reviewed under secret. So I'll move along. There's really not much of a change there, but I don't know if the board wants to comment on that.
Any comments?
No, I just found the poll results where 87% of the community wanted excellent connectivity. And if, from what I'm hearing, doing Tier 2 as, administratively, I think that can only expedite, and it's clearer to the applicant what they need to do if it's all spelled out in the code. And I think it'll just, work to improve connectivity more quickly.
Thanks, Kathy. Okay, Eric, you want to?
Yep. Yeah, I'm almost done here. So, I think I touched upon all of these things at various points, but, the benefits here that we see are we're maintaining the standard of review. We're simplifying and streamlining the review process, in particular for minor applications. We're complying with federal regulations. again, I cross-referenced this proposal with Cityscape. They ensure us that we will be able to do that. This will better empower us to do that. And really, we're clarifying the review process, and we're clarifying definitions in the code. Based on the things that I've said here, we're really not changing too much, at least as far as what the town even has an ability to control with review of these applications. So this is a key part here, and maybe a good jump into the larger discussion for the town board here. So this is a short-term proposal here. Basically, I gave this presentation. We will work with Cityscape and the town attorneys to formulate new definitions for the tiers and a new review process. And by that, I mean specific code wording that could ultimately be adopted by the town board. That would, of course, then come back before the board for another work session just to discuss the actual verbiage and language of those code sections. And then, of course, you would have a public hearing on that before it would be adopted. So that's really the short-term process that covers what I've talked about here today. There's still a lot that needs to be done as far as updating our wireless code and our wireless master plan. Some of those things that we would do in the medium term would be going over the application requirements. There's a section of the code that outlines what applicants are required to submit. It is not only, I think, a bit outdated. It mentions, plans and a scale of et cetera, but it doesn't actually even list that visualizations, visual renderings are required. It doesn't even list that a structural analysis is required. I mean, that's a major item that we require of every application. And it's not very realistic on the types of plans that we require to properly review an application. So that's something to update. Another thing is the fee structures. We charge a various amount based upon the tier and whether or not it's a modification. It generally ranges from about $2,500 for the most basic application to I think $12,500 for a tier 3 application. I've actually heard that for the small cell we can't charge the $2,500. I will say I've seen all the invoices. Again, we send every application to Cityscape for review currently, and I wouldn't propose to change that. I've looked at their invoices. We're not in a situation, I don't have exact numbers for you, but we're not in a situation where they're charging much more than the applicants are providing for the applications. But really taking a look at the fee structure, which has not significantly changed in a number of years, would be something that I think would be important and a fruitful discussion to have. We would update the forms and instructions. And then another topic that I brought up to the town board before is the concept of the wireless registry, which is something that is codified currently. It's in our code. It basically is a requirement that every carrier within the town give a list of their facilities, what equipment they have, give an update on an annual basis, and say, here's our equipment at this location, here's our equipment at this location. Give us a demonstration of what coverage they estimate that they provide. It's something that would be very beneficial. It's something that we have not kept track of since we had somebody hired years and years ago, around 15 years ago when I started with the town, who was their sole task was keeping track of these things. It's something that we could have Cityscape work on. It's something that obviously if we are either hiring somebody in-house or farming this out to a consultant will cost money. Right now, we don't charge the applicants for the registry. That's something that could be considered and should be considered. And I think that that's something that we should get on and maintain as we change the code and adopt a new plan. So this is basically...
Can I ask a question about the wireless registry? Are you saying
Sure.
for even wireless that's in the state right of way, we would want to know where all of them are, correct?
Yeah, we certainly would. That, I guess, requires a deeper delve into the legal implications of that, but I wouldn't think that it would be something that would be difficult, as long, the carriers don't care to, I wouldn't think would care to let us know where they have the,
Right.
what you'd call a node of that network of small cell. I think they would balk at us saying that we have jurisdiction over that, because my understanding is we absolutely do not. But I don't think that that's something that they would object to in a registry, and I think it's something that would be very beneficial. We want each carrier to tell us where their facilities are, where their coverage is, give us the full scope of, where they are in the town, so that we can, as we move to, part of the, and this is, I guess, a good segue into the next slide, which is my last one, which is long-term
Well, Eric, can I
plans.
just go back to the registry?
Yeah, sure.
Would there be a fee schedule associated with that registry?
That is, I would imagine so, and I would recommend that. If we're having either town staff or a consultant working on this, it costs money, and it's reasonable to require that each carrier offset that. And that's something that in the future, as far as the exact figures, we can discuss. But it's something that in that code section that's referenced on this slide, it says, and in other sections of the code, it says, and my understanding is that it is legally enforceable, that the town can charge carriers necessary and reasonable fees for processing applications. So I would think that would definitely be a part of that effort.
Eric, I recall that there were preliminary discussions with Cityscape about that, and I was looking for my notes, but they're packed away. I believe that you can only charge basically what it costs to maintain that registry. It can't be, a revenue driver.
Exactly.
And I believe Cityscape thought that maybe annually was, that it was more, every other year you updated it, because it is a very time-consuming project. But I believe it was something that they could take on if we wanted to do that.
Yes, yeah, they definitely said that they would do that. The dollars and cents and the term, those are all things we can hash out, but I'm just identifying these because I really would like this. First of all, I would like the town board to adopt the short-term changes to the review process and definitions that I presented here today. But I'd also like this to be a step back. We've been working behind the scenes, as many of you know, on this, but we haven't had a general wireless discussion in front of the town board in a little bit of a while. And I'd like this to be, a commencement of really moving in the direction of setting all of the short, medium, and long-term goals. The biggest of which, and I'll just segue to that, is updating the wireless master plan. That is absolutely vital. That is something that Cityscape will come up with based upon their expertise and their experience. They've worked on master plans for numerous other municipalities. Obviously, that is not something that I anticipate the first draft will be absolutely perfect. This is a process. It will require public hearings, discussions of revisions. The town board and the people of the town are going to have to have a discussion about what standards they think need to be met. Ultimately, the wireless master plan would be adopted, and then the code would be overhauled to reflect the recommendations of that and of that adopted plan. That is how we did it 20 years ago when the first and only wireless master plan was adopted. But that's really the process. Again, I would mention, the steps that we have taken and have accomplished. Anyone going to the town website can see right on the homepage there is the infrastructure report that was done by Cityscape, which outlines and illustrates the areas of coverage and coverage deficiencies. Part of the wireless master plan update and part of updating new code standards is to identify, not only designs that the town prefers, but also through identifying where we have deficiencies in coverage, also pointing the carriers in the direction of properties and locations that we feel are appropriate. A big part of what hamstrings and ties the hands of the town is that basically, from what I've heard, and I'm paraphrasing, if a carrier can demonstrate a coverage gap in an area, the town has to give them something. Now, the standard is that the applicants have to propose the least obtrusive means of remedying that coverage gap that is available to them. But a big part of doing that is identifying areas and potential properties where you could have less impacts, where you have a project that it might not be perfect, but is much better than what an applicant might happen to be proposing at that time. So with all of those considerations, I'll leave it to the town board to discuss. And if you agree with at least the changes to, the general idea of the changes to the definitions in the review process, I'll get working on that with Cityscape and the town attorneys, and we'll look to have something to you sooner rather than later as far as a code revision for you to vote on.
I do have a question though, Eric. From what I understood, the master plan is really a sum of the parts that Cityscape has either completed or is in the process of, right? So, they came out here and they surveyed all of the infrastructure, they've cataloged everything, they did the mapping analysis for us, and now we're up to revising the town code. So when you say short-term definitions of tiers, and then medium term is the applications, doesn't it all kind of have to be done together? If we agree, and I said earlier that I support the administrative permit for tier 2, because that makes perfect sense to me. I guess that's my first question. Really, isn't short term and medium term, aren't they pretty blended together?
Yeah, I mean, all of them are. In a certain sense, and when I say short term, medium term, long term, I don't mean next week, a year from now, and 10 years from now we're going to get working on this. I in fact spoke with Susan Raybold of Cityscape this morning, and I have been talking to her. Well, I talked to her yesterday about this. I basically told her I was going to do this presentation. We'd be looking to do the definition and review process revisions right away, but we'd like to have a meeting soon to discuss how we're going to update the wireless master plan. So I guess you're right. They are all interconnected, and they all relate to each other and bounce off of each other. But when I'm defining the length of term, it's not that we're going to get started on one thing and then the next thing, we're not getting started on the short term, then the medium and the long term. I mean, I'd like to start working on the long term stuff, and we have, in various capacities, but really start hashing out a time frame for when we're going to have a wireless master plan update and some of those other elements within the coming days and weeks.
I think the point here was that this was something that needed to be immediately addressed, that we have a quick solution for. Let's clean it up, let's get it done. Some of the other aspects of the wireless master plan will take a little bit more time to flesh out, and there'll have to be a lot more conversation about. This was really the low-hanging fruit, if you will, and so we picked that off right away, because it does take up a great deal of resources, adds confusion to the whole process the way the code's currently written, and it's something we can fix without a great deal of time going by. So rather than wait until the whole thing's fully baked and we can present it all at once, it seems to make sense to take care of this portion, and there is more work to do, obviously, on closing the coverage gaps, identifying properties, and process, and a way to really address those some of those larger connectivity issues that we have.
Yep,
and I think
exactly.
Obviously, the other thing we'll have to talk about some more as well is the design standards for the small cell. And there are a number of different, locations that can incorporate small cell, whether it's a utility pole, whether it's actually a light fixture, in some cases, street lighting. That's something that we're going to be updating throughout the town with LED lighting, and some of those fixtures have the ability to also house small cells. So if we adopt that type of standard, then we have some control over the aesthetic and location to some degree. Anything else? Any other questions, comments before we move on?
No, thank you, Eric, for explaining it all, and I look forward to moving this ahead.
Great, thank you, Eric. And next up, we have
Thanks, guys.
Amendment to Chapter 167, littering. And I think we have David McMaster and Kathy. You've been working with. Good.
David McMaster is joining right now.
Thanks, Jason.
I'll wait till David gets in the meeting. I'll wait till David.
And David is in. And David, can you mute your device in the background? Thank you. Awesome.
Okay, so you folks may be feeling like you're having a little deja vu because we did review this last month, but then we noticed it for public hearing. But since then, we heard back from our code enforcement director, Kevin Cooper, requesting one more modification. So if David, you want to just take us through the modification and explain why Mr. Cooper had requested it, that would be helpful.
Sure. Good afternoon. So, like Kathy just said, at the request of Kevin Cooper, Director of Code Enforcement, we're presenting additional changes to Chapter 167 of the Town Code, Litter and Dump Control. On the document that was circulated to the town board members, the new changes are highlighted in blue. The Town Code defines yard waste as organic materials consisting of leaves, brush, branches, vines, and yard clippings. The proposed changes today will require vehicles transporting loads of yard waste within East Hampton town to cover and secure those loads. The goal is to reduce spillover onto town roadways, which is part and parcel of the other changes we made to Chapter 167 with drag out. I think that there have been a number of situations where they were seeing trucks driving around with uncovered leaves, and potentially if they don't happen to see the leaves blowing out of it, there was hesitation to write a ticket. But obviously a truck that's uncovered and full of leaves isn't really secured and is just waiting to have those blow out. So that's the extent of the changes for 167.
So what we'd like to do, when we noticed it for public hearing, we had set the public hearing date as April 7th. So what I'd like to have is a new resolution noticing this and keep that April 7th date to hear the amendments to this code.
So if the board agrees, we'd have that hearing noticed on Thursday?
Correct.
Yes.
Any comments or questions about this?
I'm good with it. Thank you, Kathy, and thank Kevin Cooper.
Yeah, it's reasonable, and I support it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised we didn't already have something in the code about covering loads.
I thought we
yard waste, just for garbage, huh?
Well, it's all loads have to be covered or secured. And so I think that Kevin spotted was a loophole where somebody in the situation with the leaves in the truck that haven't blown out, even though they're uncovered, he said, well, nothing is blown out, so they must be secured. And obviously that's not true.
Right.
I got it.
Right. So this is kind of like belts and suspenders.
Okay. Yeah. It's
thankfully,
there. So
I only have to wear belts right now, but I'm headed for suspenders. If COVID lasts another year, I'd have to have suspenders, I think.
I hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. Thank you, Kathy. And that brings us up to another amendment to the town code that's proposed, and that is Chapter 109, Peddling.
Right. So this came up when we, last month when we were talking about special events. And we had said then that we wanted to look at making amendments to the peddling code in order to clarify activities on the beaches. So David, if you want to take it away again, please.
Yes, I apologize. There might have been a clerical typo on the email I sent around. It's actually Chapter 198 of the town code. These changes were drafted at the request of the East Hampton Town Marine Patrol and are also related to the changes to Chapter 151, special events that we've discussed in previous meetings. In sum and substance, the proposed changes clarify the existing definition of peddler to confirm that that definition includes, I'm going to read from the proposed changes, any person who solicits orders, processes transactions, or otherwise conducts business on the internet or via mobile app as a separate design to evade the provisions of this local law. Later on in that section, a person who charges a fee for the delivery or installation of beach chairs or umbrellas at a town beach shall also be considered a peddler. A person who charges a fee for the provision of beach fire services, including but not limited to the building and or maintenance of beach fires, shall also be considered a peddler. A person who rents water sports equipment, including but not limited to kayaks, paddleboards, surfboards, and windsurfers, shall be considered a peddler. That's the first part, and I think the most significant part of the proposed changes. And the second part of this is at the end in section 198.13, in the penalty section. This adds explicit authorization for the police or whatever enforcement agency is writing a ticket to seize the instrumentality of peddling as to be used as evidence in justice court prosecution. And I think that adds an additional layer of potential deterrence that our Marine Patrol officers have requested.
So David, let me just ask this question. Do we allow peddling on town beaches?
We do not allow peddling on town beaches, Peter, but excuse me, Mr. Supervisor, but there has been a perceived loophole in the law about certain activities and whether or not they constitute peddling because the...
I just want to make it clear that what we're looking at doing is tightening up the regulations surrounding activities to incorporate them as peddling so that the no peddling on town beaches can be fully enforced where there may have been a loophole before. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, I just want to make that clear for the public because they may not understand how this all fits together and what we're trying to do.
That's a good point.
And then if I could also share that Hampton Beach Services was in Justice Court on March 7th, and they pleaded guilty to 36 counts of no special event permit, which are misdemeanors. And it was 36 counts at $250 per count for a fine of $9,000. And just want to thank David and code enforcement and Marine Patrol for, being so diligent and following all that up.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this?
Just two comments. First one, I appreciate this and also specifically how we're keeping up with what the new age of the internet and how a lot of transactions are being placed right now. And it gives that accessibility so there's not that loophole there. My only other one is just for discussion. It comes to 198.11 C1. It's actually about concession locations, and it also goes to E1A through C about peddler locations. I'm wondering, since we do change those time to time, should we put a discussion point in there about doing that through a resolution instead of the code, or that means we have to change the code every time? Some of these locations aren't even actually locations that we put out for RFPs anymore. But it means anytime we change it, add it out there, bring it back in, we would have to change the code, or can we do that through resolution? It's just something I caught as I was reading it. I don't know if there's any discussion on that.
I think that's a good point. David, I do think that, we would have to change the code anytime we wanted to issue a concession agreement at a different location, as this is written. So I would ask to maybe discuss that with John a little bit, and Carol as well. Carol, I see you're shaking your head. Do you have
trouble I see there? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. The only trouble I see there is the amount of people that call in that want to pedal and don't fall into the scope of the law. We tell them to read the code, and I think for them to go back looking for resolutions each time for a different place or whatever it is going to make this code even more complicated than it already is for these people. That's all.
That's a good point as well.
Right, and I guess what we could do, David, we could go back and revisit with Jeannie Carrozza too, to see if there's anything missing from this list. And, obviously we can include, just because that location is in the code doesn't mean we're necessarily going to, give a peddler's permit for it. Maybe, I don't know, David, instead of shall be available, is there a way to counter that so that it's, at the discretion of the town board or something to that effect? So, or, including but not limit, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah,
is there a way to couch it and make sure and that way we could have an exhaustive list?
We can certainly look into that, and I can follow up with the board at another meeting with my ideas.
Well, it's not even another meeting. Even if you got it here by tomorrow, I don't want that to hold back what we need to do here, and we need to get this. We need to get this notice in April, so we can be ready to prepare that for everyone, so they can do their own jobs, either for the town entities or the businesses. So I don't want that necessarily hold it back. It was just a discussion point, but maybe we can even get that quicker than then. But I thank you for any look into it. But the rest of it, I'm fine with.
And that's a good point, David, because Marine
One more point is,
need this to be adopted before the start of the season.
Right. I agree.
Go ahead, Carol.
But one more point is the reason why all those beaches that we were allowing it were listed, even if they didn't have a bid, was because people that have a license going street by street or just want to have, whatever they're going to do, they're allowed to go to the beach that's listed there that does not have a concession and not remain standing, opposed to going to a place where they feel that you could pedal, like Stephen Hand's, that's not there, where pedaling is not allowed at all. That was the reason for them being listed.
So at those locations, there's a time limit as to how long they can stop there, right? Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is it 30 minutes or?
30 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there a certain period of time they have to be away? 30 minutes in a day, and that's it? Or they go away and do a route?
That's not in there. It says they have to move, and yes, there has been some that have done that. So that would be a clarification that could be put in at some point.
Right. They'll stay 30 minutes, drive around the block, and come back for another 30 minutes.
Or go to the next road end and then come back again after another 30 minutes or something. Okay. Anything else on this topic? Okay.
So we'll go back and, incorporate all the board's comments and I guess bring this back. We bring it back to the first work session in April, David. We could probably still notice it the first Thursday and hear it the third Thursday.
Okay. Yeah, so that'd be April 5th.
Right.
So we're to get that back on for April 5th. Okay, moving on, we have addition to the code, chapter 102, building construction. This has to do with surveying and staking of proposed clearing. And David and Councilwoman Overby have been working on this.
Yeah, this really came out of the Wainscott CAC, so thank them for their efforts. They had started a new group called the Wainscott Tree Society, and they are concerned about trees coming down indiscriminately, or because someone has overcleared, or they have those moments where they say, I didn't know that. So we're going to have them a little more conscious of where the clearing is taking place. So working with Kim Shaw, Mark Abramson, and David. So David, I'm going to let you discuss. It's pretty simple, and
Sure.
Let's talk about it.
Okay. So as the board knows, we're in the midst of a construction boom. And one of the downsides of this has been overclearing of vegetation incidental to that construction that's in violation of the town code. To help remedy this problem, we're proposing to add additional requirements to the building permit application process that's set forth in Chapter 1027. Namely, we would add a requirement under subsection H that would read, a survey together with an affidavit from a New York State licensed surveyor indicating that the clearing limitations for the subject property as set forth on the survey have been staked in accordance with the East Hampton Town Code clearing limitations. And then there's a number of exceptions that I have added after conversations with Ann Glennon and Mark Abramson. Now, Mark has actually just emailed me a updated copy of what he wants to even get into more nuance for the exceptions. So the board doesn't actually have those. So I apologize for that, but I will read it to you now. It just adds that lots with legally pre-existing clearing predating adoption of code in 1984, 1996, and 2004, and then it cites the applicable sections of town code or otherwise legally approved overclearing. So the copy that the board has just says 2004. The other years refer to, I think, the year that the water recharge and harbor protection districts were adopted. So that's. I will provide the board with copies.
Yeah, I have a question about that. So the first one, lots that are pre-existing are exempt from the requirement. And I guess my question is, they may have different standards of what's allowed to be cleared, but we wouldn't want them to be cleared even further, right? If they're already at the limit. I mean, the whole goal here is to keep additional overclearing from taking place. Is that correct?
Well, I think that I take your point, but I think that this refers to lots where they're, grandfathered in that they can clear cut. Well, we don't want to encourage them to do that.
Okay, but you're talking about a case where they're entitled to clear further?
Yes, those properties would be exempt if there was, like, ag overlay properties have, they're exempted from the clearing restrictions, so they probably wouldn't be required to stake because they're exempted from it.
So if the lot was cleared prior to, say, water recharge overlay, right?
Yes.
You're saying that they still retain the ability to clear 100% of the lot?
I don't know specific for water for that district, but whatever their
my understanding was that whatever you had cleared pre-existing is frozen in time. And if, for instance, you were only allowed to clear a half acre and you cleared three quarters, and then the code changed and said you're only allowed to clear a half acre, you can't clear more than you already have at the point of non-conformity, right?
Yes, that's my understanding as well.
So I think this means, in my reading of it, it's a little confusing and maybe leaves a loophole that they're exempt simply because they had some pre-existing clearing. They may have more that they could clear, but they're not entitled to clear it under the law. And we want to prevent clearing beyond what was frozen time, if you will. So I think,
that could be taken up.
Would exempt those properties. I mean, in the case where they have 100% clearing ability, then yeah, you wouldn't require this. But I think there are other cases that fall into this definition that.
So maybe we could add with pre-existing 100% clearing.
Yes, and that makes sense to me because
that makes
otherwise you could clear beyond what you're allowed, and the point here is to basically require that that we preserve the amount of natural vegetation on the lot.
That's an excellent point, and I will add legally pre-existing 100% clearing, or any further caveat that makes more sense, because I don't want to provide a loophole for people to over-clear. That's definitely not the goal.
And so again, the staking part of it, currently the way the building permits are issued, in my understanding, is you have to submit a survey showing the clearing on the property or the proposed clearing for the project. Yes. So if it's an existing lot where there's an existing house and you're going to build an addition, for instance, you have to demonstrate what your allowed clearing is, whether or not you're in compliance, and the limit of any additional. So we're staking out the boundary between the permissible clearing and what needs to be retained.
I think it's the language is the clearing limitation. So whatever the area that they're allowed to clear to would be the line of the property.
To delineate right. So let's say instead of clearing, we're talking about right now under the code, you have to stake the location of a swimming pool.
Yes.
So you actually stake out the perimeter of that area where you're going to be working for the pool, and that's where it's located. So we'll be delineating between cleared and allowed clearing and clearing that has to be maintained, right?
Yes.
That's the intent here.
Yes.
Just thank you for that. I just want to make sure I understand it.
So, if you don't mind, I just got a couple comments and thoughts. Like, I know when I was on the zoning board, clearing was becoming one of the major issues in the town, and I'm really happy we're to this point for having this discussion, Sylvia, how we got to this point. So there's a couple things here. I know an affidavit, I don't know if it's necessary because the signed survey, signed and sealed survey should act as that also. It might just be another encumbrance of money that would be charged to the property owner. Our biggest thing, another thing is about what about a fine schedule for noncompliance of clearing? Are we going to see if we can incorporate a greater fine schedule or fee schedule that will make anyone, becoming a little bit more of a cynic that doesn't comply on purpose to do this? Where does that come to a point?
I have a couple of comments on that when you're ready.
Sure. Okay. I'll just go through a couple here then too. I think another big issue here is it's the outreach. Surveyors are licensed and legally bound licensed by the state. So the surveyors might go there, but the survey only really gets checked into by the town when there's a building permit. Or it's being requested. There's no trigger. So sometimes there might be 2-3 different surveyors on the same property. They all might survey the clearing areas differently. This is sort of targeting new builds or new constructions, which is good. But I guess it's how can we make sure that there's less ambiguity to clearing? Can we potentially do that through outreach to our landscapers, to other contractors through that license? Can we offer a course potentially, but be a continuing education course to any of these individuals to make sure that surveying is the definition of surveying, of clearing the town of East Hampton is set across the board. I would also be interested in in putting, if it's new clearing such as this, or clearing that would be through a building permit, to adding a project limiting fence and specific overlays. I would only like to look at HPOD, Harbor Protection Overlay, where, it's sometimes the most important protective areas on HPOD, where water can run typically a lot of times right down to the, water or runoff can go right down to the land. Those are some of my main questions. Also, I want to watch out for, we had this a couple times in the zoning board where an IA system was going in, and there's additional clearing for an IA system, particularly if it's a high water table, and the drain field has to go in. How can we address, potentially still allowances for IA systems, which we want, and upgrades, but allow for clearing? Can we renotate that? Is there a percentage that we can discuss on that?
But I think that would be a different discussion. That would be just addressing clearing and clearing calculations. I mean, to me, when you said project limiting fence, I mean, I think that's basically what we're looking for, is to say, look, you have a building envelope and a clearing envelope, and we want you to stay within those, and we want them delineated so that there's no mistake. Oops, we over cleared.
Yeah.
I think that's really the problem. And, we've seen, frankly, far too many times where, builders come in, they're maybe not familiar with our rules, or they think it's okay, or the owner insists that they want the property cleared beyond the limits of the law. And they already have, when they get a stop work order, or it comes to the attention of the town, they say, well, here's our re-veg plan. Here's our revegetation plan. They've already developed the plan because they want to overclear, and they simply provide a revegetation plan to make the landscape as they'd like to see it. So I think we want to, that's the reason swimming pools ended up being required to be staked as to their location, because far too many times the pools would go in, and people would come to the zoning board afterwards. Oh, it's too close. I need a setback variance. Or in one extreme case, the swimming pool is actually built on a neighbor's property. I don't know if you all remember that. It was probably 15 or 20 years ago. And, so having the state surveyor, the surveyor stake the property, there's really no mistaking. Sorry about the pun, but.
That leads into my questions, and from my experience too on the zoning board, and I think I was on that pool one where the property owner actually had to cut off the part that was in setbacks and reached into the neighbor's yard, and as it was a heart-shaped pool, Phil Gamble said, "We hate to break your heart, but
we're not granting the variance."
But the issue is, for me, is once they have it staked out, do we go back out and inspect? Or before the actual structure foundation is placed in, I know there's inspection triggers for electrical and septics that have to be looked at, but in order to stop people from doing something that you really can't fix, even with a revegetation plan, they don't have to plant mature things. How do we stop the process from moving beyond that staking and ensure that that's in compliance, so we don't have to do things retroactively? Is there an inspection trigger? Is that too onerous for town employees? How do we, staking sounds great, but if there's nobody there to say that stake's correct, we're still going to be at the same place at the end of the day, is my fear.
Yeah, I think. I was just going to say, I think that if you start out from the point of this is the line, don't cross the line, then you're kind of dealing with a different situation as opposed to maybe a mistake. And that goes back to the discussion about what the fines, what the penalties are. Maybe you get a timeout. I don't know if that's legal or not. Where you have a stop work order issued, and you can't start work again until the revegetation plan has been vetted and approved and put in place. You can't continue with construction. That would be a huge deterrent. because my experience is that time matters more than money in many cases. And so you can't get time back, and you can make more money. And so I think that might be one possible remedy, to disincentivize what has become a common practice.
So it still doesn't answer the question of inspection, I don't think.
I think the point of we do have inspectors that go on the site, and if the line's there, they'll see that. That's not to say somebody can't move stakes.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
But the final survey is going to point that out.
Right.
And again, having some sort of, maybe you don't get a CO issued.
Right.
So I mean, there are remedies, but I think we have to figure out what the disincentives are, because that's preventative, and it doesn't take too long for the word to get out. Just like the word got out among developers, oh, well, you can just clear it and then show up with a revegetation plan. That's the remedy, just revegetate. And it's not commensurate with a natural landscape by any means. Mature trees, understory, all of that. It's hard to duplicate with a re-veg plan.
So David, we had talked about doing the re-veg plan issue at a later time or in a different section.
Okay.
Both Davids. David and David. Is that correct, David McMaster? We were going to do that later.
Yes, and I think I don't know if the board is aware, but the overclearing is an unclassified misdemeanor. So someone that's convicted of this potentially, runs the risk of carrying a criminal record as a result of it, which, from my experience, is a surprise to a lot of the defendants in justice court. So I think that there have been some discussion of possibly reducing it to a violation and even moving this to the admin bureau. But this is one of the offenses that I'd like to keep in justice court as a misdemeanor, because I think that's the best leverage that we have to try to
repeat that, David, for everyone listening. Overclearing is a misdemeanor.
Yes. And I've had, plea negotiations and cases in justice court where, the person worked in a profession that was regulated by the SEC. And I, was discussing that that's in a regulated profession. You have to report your criminal convictions. And after that, we got compliance. So
perhaps there should be I think you have to notarize your building permit or get an affidavit signed that you understand that.
I was thinking the same thing, actually, that would be, there'd be a little paragraph somewhere in there explaining, clearing the process. Do you understand it and understand what the penalties and violations are, and have to actually sign and get it notarized?
Yeah, initial it, right.
Would that be in this section, David? Would you put it here?
I'd have to talk to Glenn about that.
Form itself, maybe.
Yeah, probably in a different section, but I would defer to Anne where she wanted it.
Okay.
And I think too, like part of because the goal in justice court is compliance. So when I have the defendants that are charged with overclearing and then successfully submit and implement a revegetation plan, sometimes that could run them a lot of money. At that point, if someone's already spent over $10,000 and the property is in compliance, how much more are we really out for? Is the goal of the sentence at this point, is it punitive? Is it because I think that they've spent.
Well, the problem is that if you're in justice court and you agree to re-veg plan or whatever, it's too late. You're not going to duplicate mature trees on the property, understory, soils, etc.
Absolutely. I completely agree. But from a deterrence and just, criminal justice perspective, like what is the goal of increasing the fines on this? I'd rather go for having somebody require them to implement a revegetation plan and get the plants in the ground.
That could be part of it, but I think, I don't know if if there's a way of holding up, I don't know if that holds up the CO, if that halts the building progress,
I really liked your idea earlier about the stop work order potentially, some kind of variation of that. If they clear past the line that because time is money, and I think that's something that we could explore and would be a great deterrent. In fact, that's a really excellent idea.
And is it doable to make it a part of a standard condition on the ZBA approvals and planning board approvals, that, the statement about, understanding the penalties for clearing?
We can certainly look into that.
And I know this goes off to another side of clearing, but a lot of clearing doesn't just happen when there's fresh construction. A lot of clearing happens through transaction or transactions, because there's no trigger for inspection when the house is sold. I know Southampton and other communities are now doing triggering a C of O for any. I need to update a C of O for any transaction. That would be one way that clearing would have to be confirmed on a property before it gets lost through multiple.
Yeah, you make a really good point there, David, because so many transactions are not reliant on mortgages anymore, which would then trigger a CO. If it's a cash sale, that can take place without a CO, and then we don't find out about the overclearing necessarily. And the buyer, in some cases, doesn't find out about the clearing either, because we've certainly had plenty of cases where somebody bought a property that they thought was okay, and find out only when they go to get the CO that now they're stuck with the overclearing and revegetation issues.
Kate and I saw that a bunch when we were together on the zoning board at that time then too, and then they go after the builder, but the builder is now 1 year guarantee is gone and such like that. So
David McMaster, that might be another thing to look at, triggers for CO on transfer.
Good idea.
I mean, it's not just even clearing. It can be safety issues too, proper pool fence, smoke detectors, all that sort of thing. For properties, changing hands without getting an updated CO, you can't verify whether or not the property is safe.
And in the end, I'm very happy this is being addressed now, and that other aspect of outreach, is that through a town communications, or how can we do that potentially through our licensing when everyone gets their renewals, informational packets to what the code is, because that's just as important, because how many people are actually watching us now or read the papers if it gets to the papers, which I hope it does. But how do we get it out there further, which is always one of our difficulties as boards. But Sylvia, I'm enjoying this conversation because it's been brewing for a long time. It really has.
So this particular addition to this chapter 102. So David McMaster, can you articulate what we can do now for Thursday, if we can schedule this, if you need to go back and redo some of these things, or are we going to add in things like a stop work order? We're not going to talk about applications, on permits yet, and we're not going to, this law wouldn't talk about triggers for COs, I don't think.
I think that we should proceed with just this piece of it, because when I'm mulling over the stop work order and the basis in the code for issuing a stop work order, right? There has to be necessarily a dangerous condition. So I don't know that, I'm sure we could find a legal basis to do it, but it just doesn't jump out at me right now.
Well, David, don't we issue stop work orders for non-compliance with building codes that don't, or zoning codes that they have nothing to do whatsoever with safety?
Yes, we do. Sorry.
I mean, I can think of a couple instances where there are stop work orders issued because, the plans don't jive with what's.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't think that would be an impediment.
Because I just did another totally unrelated. Okay, we could talk about it off air, but there was when the people were living in the modular homes. There was a reluctance at the construction site that the employees. We couldn't issue a stop work order for that, even though that was a violation of the.
Yeah, but that's not part of the construction. That's a use really of.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's give that some more thought and review.
But I think we could certainly, if we can come up with it, that's easy enough to add into the penalty section of this later on. But I'll obviously defer to the board if you want me to notice it on Thursday for a hearing. I can do that, or we can.
Question of you: Can we license? Can we give a license to a surveyor for the town of East Hampton, meaning that we know who's working in the town of East Hampton, even though they're licensed by the state? Because surveyors that might be here locally definitely know probably the code verbatim, but individuals that might be coming from different areas of the state might not know our fauna, our vegetation, our matters as well. Can surveyors have to be licensed in the town of East Hampton to work in the town of East Hampton? Is that one way that we can add a protective layer of knowledge?
I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to look into that. I know that we have the licensing review board for the contractors and everything else, but I would say that opens the door to, like lawyers, accountants, and other licensed professionals having to then get a local license.
And I know that the contractors code, typically we defer to a county. If there's a state license, you're a licensed surveyor, licensed, in some way by the state as, typically under the education law, we accept those licenses. We may be required to, we'd have to double check, but it may be a mandate that we can't have a local layer on top of that for those professions. We'll have to look.
Thank you.
Any other comments on this topic before we move on?
So I just need to give David direction, and David would like direction, I think, on whether or not to hear with what I heard was adding the 1984, 1986, and the 100% clearing issue that was in that first line, which was I've got it on page 3 at the bottom highlighted.
Yeah, I think those dates don't
matter as much.
You just say legally pre-existing. Clearing, I don't think that would exempt you from being required. I thought we kind of came to the conclusion that if you exempt them, then the chance of further over clearing is still prevalent.
All right, so David.
John, could I just ask, John, what do you think about, do you think that we should try to do the potential stop work order at another work session and combine it, or do this separately?
I think it'd be good to get this out there and then, look at the stop work order separately.
Okay.
That's probably a minor change, but at least we get this out and the requirements will be implemented by the billing department right away.
Okay.
Do we think that about the affidavit, is that too onerous, or is that a stamped survey already akin to an affidavit?
I kind of think a stamped survey is basically it's the surveyor's representation that what's on the survey is accurate. So I think the affidavit might be, it's a little redundant, I guess.
The affidavit would be for like the builder or the owner or both, stating that they understand what the clearing restrictions are, right?
And it also attests to the physical staking of it. So and that sets up kind of the whole means of enforcement of it is that person saying, I've gone and I've staked this clearing line, and then that allows for the enforcement mechanism, like you said, of nothing past this line. So that affidavit just shows that that's been done.
Okay.
I agree with that. The survey just speaks to the abstract existence of the line on the survey. The affidavit is for the physical presence of the staking on the property.
Are we requiring the staking to be on the survey though for the permit?
I would think so. Then you wouldn't need to have the affidavit in that case.
But you could have that, we could change that to the homeowners and, make them agree that they are aware that, moving those stakes is a violation of law and, submit some to penalties because, that's what happens sometimes. I remember, talking about zoning board cases where you have that situation where an owner comes in and says, yeah, we had to lift the stakes to get some equipment in and I guess we didn't put it back in the right place. It does happen. And then you'll have those people who probably do it, maybe with a little more sinister intent. But so it wouldn't be a bad idea to have it, I guess, and maybe include the property owner in it as an additional enforcement tool.
So, yeah, because right now on the surveys, all you have is what you see is proposed clearing in a kind of drawn line, but it's not dimensional or, you can't tell what the dimensions, and it's only in a written word that you get the proposed clearing dimensions.
Delineating a clearing line and, then there's a sign off by the builder and the owner that they understand the line has to be maintained throughout construction and that, over clearing, has certain penalties and that they've read and understand that and they sign off on it.
Would that be in this same section that we're talking about?
John, would you have to have it even in the code or could it be just on the building permit application form?
I think it could be part of the permit application.
Yeah.
They kind of do that now in a lot of ways, so we could just add that into the permit application, the specific reference to the clearing and the over clearing liability under the code.
Yeah. It's just akin to a jurat where you sign something that says false statements made herein are, punishable under whatever section of the penal law.
Right.
You can have that for clearing and said, over clearing is punishable by up to whatever. Yeah.
So how many days in jail?
Well, I don't know if it's an unclassified misdemeanor. I think it's a B, so it might be up to 60 potentially. Or there's a chance it might be if it's an A level, it'd be 90, but I believe that it's 60.
And so, John, if I said about staking in accordance with the East Hampton Town Code, and we want to do stake and clearing on certain increments, instead of like 4 stakes, could we do staking every 50 feet, something to that effect? Or would that also be best placed for the permit, or is that best placed for the code?
I think you could put that in the permit. I think that's going to have some discretion because there might be situations where, just a straight every 15, every 20 feet, whatever it is, might not work. And maybe the building inspector would want to see it delineated more frequently.
Well, maybe say something to the effect no less than.
Right.
Can we just say project limiting fence?
That's another financial constraint onto it also. That's why I was saying in one area.
Plastic fencing doesn't cost a whole lot. And you're not saying how large the fence is. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you look at some of the re-veg plans and they're $50,000. I don't think, $300 worth of plastic fences. That'd be too much of a hardship. It could be, I don't know. I think the surveyors in delineating stake delineation, I mean, they're not going to be able to do an arc with 2 stakes, they kind of have to leave it to their discretion, I think, to some degree. And then it's up to the owner or the builder. I mean, they behoove them to put up project limiting fence if they're in tight quarters and they have.
But can we suggest something like, staking every X number of feet or project limiting fence? So we give them an idea.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's 2 good options on them. Okay. But besides that, we've had a lot of discussion on this, which I think. I think there's going to be more to add, but I'd be really interested to see what the public says also. So I don't mind moving this to public hearing with certain changes that we just made.
So I do see, authority for revocation of a building permit and stop work orders in 202, 11, and 12. that go beyond dangerous conditions. That actually they state that if it's not, plans, applications, specifications on the basis of which a building permit was issued, comma, or in an unsafe manner. But the language seems to be there that if you don't comply with what you submitted, you can either have your a stop work order or a revocation of the building permit.
Yep. Well, there you have it.
To circle back, are we leaving in and having the affidavit from the licensed surveyor, or are we saying it should be the property owner? Or are we not, or have we eliminated it altogether? I'm not clear.
I was thinking that if he's submitting a survey with this line delineating clearing, it's a stamped survey that's essentially the same as an affidavit.
And makes more sense. And it's,
yeah, I mean, I think we rely on signed stamped surveys for surveyors attesting to, pool location or proposed or existing buildings.
John is suggesting that it goes on a building permit.
Right, for the owner and the builder. I think that makes sense to have.
I agree with that.
Okay. And how fast can we get that done?
That's a discussion.
I think that's a building department question.
Yeah, that's a discussion with Ann Glenn, and I don't, that's literally just adding maybe a paragraph.
Okay.
The owner has to sign, owner and agent have to sign and notarize the existing permit anyway, right? So it's just literally, maybe you just initial that section.
Okay. So David, could you get that wording correct to me or to, so we can look at it and then I can ask Ann if that's okay, or you can ask Ann if this is going to work. We can add it.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. All right, so affidavit is coming out. David is going to rework this a little bit. And then we'll try to get it ready for Thursday to be noticed for public hearing.
Great. Thank you very much, Sylvia, for pushing this forward, and David for your work on this.
We're still pushing.
That's right. Well,
we're trying to get this done.
We'll get there. We'll get there. I think this has been a good discussion.
Okay, I do too. Thank you. Yep.
Okay, and that brings us up to liaison reports. Kathy, you have a liaison report for us today?
I do. So I just wanted to get the board up to speed that last week, Diane Patrizio and I met with the team from R2 Architecture, the folks that are going to be designing the new senior center. And we were discussing how we're going to use and implement community engagement as a tool to help shape the plans for the new senior center. And we've agreed that we're going to be meeting once a week as we develop the mechanics of this process. Some of the components, though, that we believe will will be a survey in English and Spanish. And David, you'll be happy to know that we want to use QR codes to get folks to the surveys. In-person meetings and charrettes, we feel now, folks hopefully will be comfortable because it would be really beneficial to be able to do this in person. But we also know that there'll be folks that will be more comfortable attending remotely. So that'll get built in to the process as well. So right now we're targeting like a Thursday evening through a Saturday morning, similar to what we did when we did the Hamlet studies, and looking at our schedules for late April or early to mid-May. In the meantime, R2 has tasked the town with identifying groups and community partners that we can work with to help spread the word as we get into this, as we seek community input and participation in the community engagement process. Next up, I just want folks to mark their calendars. I had a conversation earlier in the week with Sergeant Alversa, who is responsible for Drug Take-Back Day. Pre-COVID, we used to do them twice a year in April and October. Sergeant Alversa has said that they've designated Saturday, April 30th as Drug Take-Back Day. It'll be here at Town Hall, and we'll be running ads in the local papers like we've done in years past. wanted to talk about resolutions for Thursday. I'm hoping to offer a resolution to change the use district for those properties on Route 114. You know, we talked about putting an affordable housing overlay district over 776, 780, and 782 Route 114. We held that public hearing on March 3rd. We've got a great deal of public participation. The transcripts have been up, so I believe we need to have them up for a week before we can vote on it. And I think we've met that, we'll meet that threshold for this Thursday, March 17th. John, I did want to ask a question. We also held a public hearing for the Chapter 151 special event permits. And I was wondering how I could expedite getting that transcript posted, because we really need that legislation in place before the start of the season, because that would be most helpful. So if there's anything I can do to get that moving, that would be great.
Hasn't been posted?
It hasn't been posted. The 2 affordable housing transcripts were posted. The management and stewardship, plan for the CPF public hearing was posted, but that's the only thing I saw there as of this morning. And then Peter touched base on it, and I just wanted to talk about, will we be going back to in-person meetings? We've been conducting these remote meetings, and under an executive order from Governor Hochul, which that suspension is set to expire tomorrow, March 16th at midnight. So tomorrow's planning board meeting will be remote, but typically the governor lets us know like the day it's due to expire. So we're all, waiting here on pins and needles to know whether we're going back into public meetings. So in anticipation of that, Councilman Kate Rogers and myself set up meetings yesterday in the main meeting room with our IT folks, Heath Liebman and Nancy Serafin, as well as the folks from LTV, Jason Nauer and Matt Lowndes, so that we can ensure that town staff would be prepared, for that imminent switchback. And these meetings gave us the opportunity for folks to understand some of the updates that have been made in the main meeting room. I think folks are going to find the sound and the picture much more improved when we go back to in-person. We wanted to troubleshoot any potential issues and decide whether any new equipment was warranted. And sure enough, our planning staff had requested that we put in a desktop computer with 2 screens. So, because that has been one of the great things that have come out of these remote meetings, how, having that flexibility would be really helpful. And I think Kate, coined it the presentation station. So in the short term, we're going to have a laptop there, but IT will be ordering a desktop for that spot. And it'll also be ADA accessible, whereas at times the podium isn't. But given the historic nature of the main meeting room, we were hoping that the town's carpenters could build the table to accommodate the desktop and some other equipment that will be sitting under it. So I'm hoping that we can make that happen and maybe meet with the carpenters. Maybe Kate and I can meet with the carpenters this week and get that moving. And I just want to say that I'm grateful to the partnership with LTV, because it's been, things went seamlessly yesterday, and I think everybody had an opportunity to have a dry run that wanted one, because as I said, there have been some changes in the main meeting room. And then lastly, but I just wanted to mention that I've talked about how Kate and Sylvia and I are considered in state law councilmen, and that has always made me crazy. And I had reached out to Assemblyman Thiel's office, and I learned that Fred was a co-sponsor of legislation that replaces all instances of the words councilman or councilmen with the words council member or council members, and that it has passed the Assembly and it's in committee in the Senate. And I'm excited to, get new business cards and we'll all be council members, which we should be, because if you looked at the ballot last November, we were I believe the only office on the ballot that was gender specific, and, it should be gender neutral. So I'm excited about that, and I appreciate, Fred being a co-sponsor of that bill. And that's what I have for today. And it's fitting, it's in Women's History, Month.
Yeah, absolutely. And a somewhat historic event, having a majority the town board being all women. So,
for sure.
Let's see who's up next.
I'll take it. Sure. I want to continue letting everyone know about the town's Live Here, Work Here initiative. The town has wonderful jobs that are year-round positions, the work in town government, and also seasonal positions that can be anything from lifeguards, laborers, a lot of positions. Please contact our Human Resources Department to look into our inquiries of our jobs and how they might be beneficial to you if you're looking to do any type of transition to a different job. We have numerous ones. Live here, work here. Please, let's live in East Hampton, and maybe you want to work for the town of East Hampton then too. The Nation Preserve Committee met last week. It was a very nice discussion. We talked about, we had a management report. One of the discussions on our management report that came up was about the amount of fire load that has become into our town's preserves and areas based on the felling of our southern pine beetles trees, and that the town might want to have a discussion with some of the East End fire chiefs just to discuss this, as we continue to move forward and the trees continue unfortunately to die and perish, and how we can coordinate any discussion on that. We had we had a discussion on the Louse Point management plan, and that was led by new member Glenn, and then also by some members of the Aquaponic Protection Committee about the designs that we're looking into there. Overall, the designs haven't come back at all. They're still a little bit of a while out. But primarily, the committee and then also APC members want to see water quality actions, but in a way that is designed not to take away from the harmonious area in the way that has traditionally been used then too. So that was a nice discussion. We also discussed the management plan for Rods Valley, which is in Montauk and the Navy Road, and how there might be potential changes to that management plan that would address the increased use of combustible elements, generators and such for evening action, specifically fishing on the dock and the pier in that area. So we're discussing that. I want to let the board know that I am putting up a notice for public hearing the Gold Dart and the Fresh Pond Grasslands management plans. We'll have that on for April. I'll send it on to the board, and if any members of I'll send it to the board again, but if any members of the public have any questions on it, please contact my office. The working group for the 395 Panago Affordable Housing Project met this past week. We, as Kathy did mention, we had the public hearing before for some affordable housing projects. I will also have a resolution on for authorization for approval to the changes in density that we've noticed that determines a lot of what our density in this location will be. Planning department came up with some draft schematics for potential yield that we discussed here. We also discussed as a group some limitations and protections that we might want to put into designs or covenants on the properties at this specific subdivision to make sure that we maintain this affordability in the future. Because that's not true in some of our other properties that we've had affordable housing projects. So we want to make sure these properties are able to stay within our discussion. Our retention, excuse me. I will probably be able to get some of these schematics and discussion to the board in May, working with the planning department and the group, that we can start seeing what we are looking to do there. But again, the main key is the resolution on for increasing the density this Thursday. Let's see here. In public works, we've been mentioning Stephen Hand's Path and 114 for some time right now. as we're starting to see that on 114, the state's project has started for installation of new drainage structures on there. We're getting to a point where the discussion for this intersection should be brought to the town board for work session on the design on the town's aspect of it. Most of this is going to be for public safety, drainage, any issues that we might have with the state with subsections of federal guidelines for retention of the properties too. So I think I might want to try to schedule that in for the intersections at Stephen Hand's Path and Cedar Street and Northwest Road also then too. So that whole area is being focused on, but I think we're ready to bring that forward in April. I have been reaching out to trustees and our East Hampton Town trustees and the Clerkenburg trustees, Mr. Francis Bach, about the beach smoking restrictions that we discussed some time ago. At that discussion that the trustees had, they're unsure of where they wanted to be on a certain linear footage. I think the majority of the trustees are landing at the 500 linear feet away from the edge of protected areas. I will continue my outreach to them, but I think I would like to notice that for a public hearing, notice the public hearing the first week in April to be heard at the end of April, so that we will have that in place for the summer season. I think it's ready to get to the public, and the trustees will have to do the same also. So that's my time frame on that right now, and where I've been working in the background there. I've been working with Sylvia on beach parking and beach parking designs in everywhere from Wainscott with Sylvia to Montauk, trying to find out how we can increase the public's access to our beaches through added parking, making it safer. Some of the areas we're looking at, again, Beach Lane, Atlantic Drive. A lot of our right-of-ways right now, they go from anything from 50 feet to 100 feet. So we're looking at ways that we can make them safer and also maybe potentially increase parking, which increases our access to our public's beaches. So I think Sylvia will be able to get that to you, or Wainscott CAC for April with any charts, and for that discussion, her and I will continue to work on that.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, the Bureau of Administrative Adjudication, we're moving that forward also to a point where I think the board will be prepared to notice any code changes in April. So I look forward to getting that on there in the next 2 weeks and to the board for those changes. And then we can discuss that and notice the public hearing for that in April to potentially be prepared. So that's moving along steadily. Montauk CCOM is having Montauk on My Mind, a virtual discussion with Laura Tooman. That is going to be on Thursday, March 17th at 5 p.m. If you're interested in joining on to that, please contact Laura at CCOM in Montauk for that type of discussion on conversations in Montauk and its environmental priorities. I want to thank members of the East End's emergency medical systems from particularly Chief Jerry Terza, East Hampton Fire Department, and other members of the ambulance, Tom Giardella. We participated in a panel discussion last Thursday. I didn't participate. I was there with Tommy John Schiavone. We did have some comments there. But the discussion went around the future outlook of our emergency services. Are they going to be paid at one time? How is the retention for their personnel? How does affordable housing, and specifically what's so important, and Peter's going to be leading, is our offering plans for our affordable housing. Transfer tax could be used to assist our volunteerism. Where do we outreach for volunteers? It was a great discussion there. I want to thank them. I also want to thank Chief Jerry Terza, as I did at that moment there. He is stepping down from being chief of the East Hampton Fire Department after staying on for an extended period of time. He has done a tremendous job, I believe, for the town of East Hampton, our residents, as the chief of the fire department and the fire engineer, and during COVID even more so. So congratulations, Chief Terza. We had a meeting with the Little League ball field relocation committee, recommitting to the plans that we are moving forward with, and the designs and the needs that we have discussed, telling them about the funding in place. Also letting them know that Little League will be played at the Panago Fields this year. They're all in agreement and moving forward. They thank the town board for doing so. And I will look forward to trying to get an RFP for construction potentially out by the end of April, if not early May, to have the Little League fields prepared and ready for the 2023 season. Talking about another form of recreation, the Montauk Skate Park project is being launched this week. We had an on-site meeting last week on Friday of American Ramp Company, who's going to be building it, and other construction agencies and town agencies to go over this project. We are looking to start that work up this week. We are actually fencing off the project with project limiting fence today. And after today, unfortunately to some of the skateboarders, the skate park is going to be closed for use until the completion of the project, but in the long game is going to be an absolutely wonderful skate park that's going to be open to all. But again, it's going to be shut down for a couple of months here right now as we get to that point. Lastly, I know this is our second to last meeting. I know we have a meeting on Thursday to the end of the month of March, and then to my birthday month, my daughter's birthday month. But also, it is the month of St. Patrick's Day and the Friends of Erin, and I would be remiss if I didn't congratulate Mrs. Behan, Mrs. Marilyn Behan, on being the Grand Marshal of the Friends of Erin Parade upcoming on March 27th. And then too, and I want to thank Kathy and Kate for getting the special event for them, and everyone to be able to get ready to bring back one of the greatest, funnest events for East Hampton and Montauk, the St. Patrick's Day Parade, which kicks off at 12 a.m. on Sunday, March 20th.
12 p.m.
12 p.m. It goes to 12 a.m.
Your parade might start at midnight.
Yeah, well, maybe. on March 27th. So congratulations, Mrs. Behan. Well deserved. And that's all.
Yeah, that's terrific. I think everybody's looking forward to the parade. Council Member Sylvia Overby.
Thank you. Add my congratulations to Marilyn, and also don't forget about the M.O. Gansett Parade, which is happening this coming weekend, I believe, right?
This Saturday at 12, and we've got Amanda Merrow and Katie Baldwin as the Grand Marshals of that parade. So
excellent. So
strong women.
Yes.
All around.
I'm going to start with Business Committee. We met last Wednesday, March the 9th. I always start with what Robert Ross gives us information COVID related at the hospital. Southampton Hospital had 3 COVID patients. 2 of those patients are on ventilators. Stony Brook Hospital had 18, and 5 of those patients are on ventilators. Eastern Long Island had 1 patient. They did testing on March 5th and 7th that he had information for. On March 5th, there were 38 people tested and 0 were positive. On March the 7th, 71 were tested and 1 was positive. So good numbers, at least for the testing, and hope it stays that way. Obviously, we focused entirely on the outdoor dining legislation, which we discussed earlier today. It was supported unanimously by the committee. A big thank you to Rick Whalen again. One thought was that the communication and outreach needs to be considered to the restaurants to make them understand that the emergency permits have gone away and are no longer available, and that this is the program that is now available, and they need to do it through the planning department as an administrative permit. So we might want to brainstorm on how to get that information to the restaurants before the season. The Anti-Bias Task Force also met. East Hampton Village is planning a tribute for Juneteenth and has invited the through Chief Mike Tracy, who is also a member of the Anti-Bias Task Force. And so they have invited the Anti-Bias Task Force to participate in their event, which will be in Herrick Park, and we are happy to do that. Our diversity show continues. Michael Butler, who is a local artist and a longtime resident of Eastville, is going to be the next guest on our diversity show, with Audrey Gaines being the MC of that show. That'll happen on March 22nd. We also had a discussion on what appears to us to be the latest attacks on human rights issues. And this is through a bill that was passed in Florida and is in the process of being considered in 28 states, dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill. And we are concerned about the results of something like this, bullying for our children, and the squandering or the squelching, I guess I should say, of free speech. And these are all issues that we are going to address through letters to the editor. So you should see some of those letters hopefully this week in the East Hampton Star. We think it's a very serious issue, and we will continue to have responses to things that are an affront to members of our community. Let's see. The Community Housing Opportunity Fund Committee met. I have a letter from them that to the town board on issues to consider for the 0.5% transfer tax spending. We had written it over a month ago, but we've been adding to it some issues that we think need to be refined and sent to the town board. So that'll be forthcoming. And I know Peter is putting together the group that is going to be looking at what those concerns are, what those things for spending will be for the 5% tax, transfer tax. 0.5%. I did say 0.5%, I hope. Clearing has begun on the Housing Authority's project on 3 Mile Harbor Road. The clearing started on March the 1st, so you should see that as that progresses. There was a discussion also about Martha's Vineyard. They have a not-for-profit, what they call Island Housing Trust at Martha's Vineyard. They do things a little bit differently than we do here, but we are going to have somebody from Martha's Vineyard as a guest at our next event, meeting, to discuss kind of how they are progressing with some of their issues, which are some of the same issues we have here. Their median price income for a house on Martha's Vineyard is $1.2 million. So it is also very difficult to live and work on Martha's Vineyard. The Arts Council met, and one of the things that is on our agenda and in our sites is the Brooks Park. There will be a letter that was unanimously agreed upon by the group, and every member of the Arts Council was there except one. And we want to continue to support Brooks Parks, even though the condition report from Drew Bennett was dire. This project must move forward, and we voted to restore, and we must restore those 4 buildings on the property. So you will get that letter coming soon. March Madness at the high school is going to be this week, and we do and sponsor an art competition, which is between the classes, and the East Hampton Arts Council provides all the paint, brushes, and big thank you to Tony Littman, who in the workshop cuts out the 4x4 panels and primes them and gets them ready for hanging before the kids even start their project. So thank you to Tony for doing that, and he delivers them to the high school. The judging will take place this Thursday. 5 members of the East Hampton Arts Council will be there, and we again thank art teacher Heather Evans for doing this program. We can see at the high school all of the panels are hung from the past years, and it's really fun to see what the kids have produced over the years. And thank you to the Arts Council for having this project year after year. There's going to be an alumni art show for East Hampton High School students, sponsored by the East Hampton Arts Council and the East Hampton Historical Society. It'll be the week of May the 13th, and it will run through the 22nd. You have to be a graduate of East Hampton High School, and then there'll also be a section of current high school students that will also be able to participate. And that is, I think I said at the opening is May the 13th, and it starts at 4 o'clock on May 13th, but we have time to talk about it again. I also attended the police reform committee. I think the supervisor is probably going to have that in his report. So I'll let the supervisor talk about it. I went to the Amagansett Citizens Advisory Committee and was the liaison for this month for them. There was a presentation by Carolyn Logan Gluck and Sarah Davidson about the development of the Wayne Scott Commercial Center. I think some of the biggest impacts they wanted to make sure that the community is aware of is traffic and environmental issues associated with the development of this property. And it was well received, and they had a nice presentation. Lots of questions were asked about it. The lighting subcommittee also discussed, and was a long presentation by John Broderick, and they had walked Amagansett Main Street, and there were some issues that they're looking at. I think, they saw that there was some uneven lighting. The lights are too high, particularly when the trees are in bloom, then it sort of diffuses the light and it seems unsafe. They need an attractive fixture, one that has better illumination. They cautioned against doing anything that looks like runway lighting, and which I agree with. One of the issues of concern that has less lighting is that entrance into the parking lot. So if you go down that small kind of little road that goes into the main parking lot, there's no lighting at all on that section, and they'd like to see some lighting added to that section, or at least to be considered. We did talk about what the town is doing, and they would hope to be involved in what the town is working on with NYPA, and I know Kim Shaw's department is really spearheading that. Seth Turner was there. He wanted to thank the CAC for advising the town and advocating for the need for another crossing guard. So they now have 2 crossing guards at the Amagansett School. Seth Turner is if you don't know, is the superintendent of the Amagansett School. And they're hoping for in-person meetings this spring. And that is my report.
Thank you, Sylvia. Kate, do you have a report for us?
Yes, I do, Peter. Thank you. First, before I start my report, I just want to call everyone's attention that tonight is the Energize East Hampton's free home efficiency webinar. It begins at 6:30 p.m. Again, this is a free informational webinar that will give folks the tools to save thousands of dollars while protecting the environment. Certainly worth going to this evening. It's virtual. It's free. And it starts at 6:30, and you can register at energizeeh.org and look for the events tab. The other event that I want to make note of is the Springs Historical Society and Community Library presents another great Meet the Author Night, Wednesday, March 16th at Ashwell Hall at 6 p.m. Again, the admission is free. And this month's Meet the Author is Randy Lorden, who writes the Mysteries Sydney Sloan series. And her most recent mystery, She's Dead, Who Cares?, takes place here in East Hampton, and will be a great read, and everyone's invited to go there and enjoy that evening. Those Meet the Author nights are really, really fun and enjoyable. And it's a great time to get together with people as we move forward without the emergency declaration. And I'm just so excited about that. I just want to take a quick moment to not only thank everyone here for all the work, keeping us safe during the emergency of COVID here on the screen, but also all the staff in the town, and extend that to the community. The teachers, I'm going to try to mention everybody, but not going to do it, but people who worked in the schools and the restaurants and the stores, and the first responders who kept our town safe and running, and still in business throughout this time under the leadership of the supervisor and this town board, my fellow town board members, and I can't thank you enough. I attended a follow-up meeting with Change Hampton in the Natural Resources Department with Kim Shaw, going over their proposal for a pollinator pathway demonstration project here at Town Hall near the front entrance. We also saw a representation of the sculpture, I'll call it the sculpture pollinator project that the supervisor is putting together, and everyone was really excited about both projects. So Change.org is an organization that is facilitating education and resources about the impacts of clearing on our insect population, but also across the board, and the excellent options that are there for creating instead pollinator pathways. It's a really great project, and I look forward to moving that forward and bringing a presentation to the board when we get to that point shortly. On Friday, we had a meeting with the CARP committee, that's the Coastal Assessment and Resiliency Plan Committee meeting. It was very productive. We had both departments in natural resources and planning involved, along with the members of the committee, to take a look at CARP, make some work group minor changes to the document, and then we'll be bringing that forward again to the town board in a presentation for adoption, so we can get moving on implementing some of the recommendations in the project to strengthen our coastal resiliency here in East Hampton. It was a really excellent, productive meeting, and I thank again everyone who attended. In the afternoon, many of the same people also attended the Waterfront Advisory Committee, and this is a committee that's formed to update the local waterfront revitalization plan that's adopted into our comp plan. And again, this is a very important coastal planning document. I mentioned that I used it many times while I was on the zoning board to support my determinations for living shorelines, etc., and the lessening of hard structures. We had at that meeting a presentation from Joyce Novak from the Peconic Estuary Partnership, and she made a presentation that was already presented in front of the trustees, and the staff here in town and myself, we had many questions on the data that was presented there, an idea of an amount of shoreline that was created, and had many questions about how that data was compiled. And members of the committee and Brian Frank will take a look at how that data was actually correlated and look to perfect it to be more meaningful with what we know happened in East Hampton town. But I thank Joyce for her presentation and for her patience during the question and answer period. We also got a new representative from New York State for the Waterfront Advisory Committee. Her name is Barbara Kendall, and she works across the state with the local waterfront revitalization plans, and we look forward to working with her in the future. On Monday, we had the meeting of the Wireless Communications Committee and discussed what Eric presented to us today in detail. And lastly, I would like to, I also, before that, I took a ride down on Friday with Kim Shaw, the Director of Natural Resources, to Beach Lane and did a field inspection of the trenching that's going on there and compliance with keeping one lane open, etc. And the wait times for traffic down on Beach Lane was about 2 minutes in one direction and 4 minutes in the other. Well, and that was caused by just moving vehicles up and down out of the line and back into the line to continue this kind of caravan of trenching and then closing up the road. Lastly, I will reiterate the call for comments as part of our secret scoping session. And please, members of the public, if you have comments, send your comments to ehamptony@ehamptony.gov before Friday, March 18th at 4 p.m. And that's what I have.
Thank you very much, Kate. I'll start with the COVID update. So over the last 6 weeks, the test results at our testing location at 110 Stevenhance Path has resulted in only 4 positives. I'm very pleased with that progress. And as a result, I will be rescinding the emergency declaration that's been in place for just over 2 years and 2 days, and the associated executive orders as well. Again, I'm extremely happy to be at this point, feeling good about the way things are going. Let's hope this continues. As the weather warms, we would expect that the rate of infection would continue to go down. Hopefully this is completely gone and we don't have to deal with it anymore. And if we do have to deal with it, that it becomes more like a seasonal flu and not quite so disruptive. The whole world's been turned upside down for 2 years, and it's caused a lot of people a lot of grief. And I'm happy to see the end. Really pleased to see that we're getting back to parades that we're going to have this year. Again, the Montauk Friends of Erin St. Patrick's Day Parade on Sunday the 27th at 12 p.m. Excited about that. We get out and see everyone, have a good time, and celebrate with what is really, in some ways, the beginning of summer. It's when a number of local businesses start opening up and people start going out more. I will be, we'll be monitoring, as Kathy said, the governor's suspension of open meetings laws due to expire. We don't yet know whether it'll be extended. We're prepared to go back into in-person meetings on the 17th if necessary. If for some reason it's extended, we may wait until the first meeting in April, which would be our next meeting. Again, one of the things that we have noticed is that overall, we've had much more public engagement in the town board meetings when people have been able to call in. We won't be able to do that anymore until enabling legislation is passed. I know there is a bill before the state legislature to amend the open meetings law, which would allow for hybrid meetings in the future. We think this is a good thing on many different levels. It allows for better accessibility to government for all sectors of our community. Disabled, people who are taking care of children, people who are at work can all take part in our democratic process in real time. And there's really no substitute for that. We have a better government when we're informed by the people that we work for. So that's the update on the meetings. I'll be offering a resolution. I think it was Sylvia that alluded to the community housing plan. I'll be offering a resolution to appoint that committee, which will be involved with developing the plan for how community housing fund monies may be spent, working out those parameters and that process. We think that it will be somewhat similar to the way water quality funds are authorized through the current CPF water quality component, that there would be a board that would review and vet projects and recommend them to the town board, recommend those expenditures to the town board. There will be a referendum this November, and we expect to have the plan pretty well in place, ready for the public to comment on by June, and to be able to give us enough time to properly advertise that plan and make the public aware ahead of the referendum. In addition to that, and Kate talked about this a little bit a couple of years ago, just before COVID struck, I had been meeting with Edwina Van Gaal and some other folks. My interest was to help inform people that there are other ways to treat your residential landscape, that you don't have to have all lawn. There are ways to plant native species and other species that help support the biodiversity of our town and support insects and birds, butterflies, all of that, which we're all dependent upon. And it's hard to assess, I think, for most people, the impact that all those species have on balancing our environment, helping our vegetation grow, keeping other pests in check, And so it's really the web of life. And when I gaze out this office window and I see large expanses of lawn, I think, we could lead by example. So there has been interest in converting some of this property, some of this landscape to areas that won't need regular mowing, that this will help support and promote wildlife and wildflowers and pollinators. And as Kate said, there have been a number of discussions over the last couple of years about installing a pollinator garden at the entrance of Town Hall so that people can see that as a demonstration project and see that you can have beautifully landscaped area in your home that really supports these different types of wildlife. We already have a pollinator garden here. It's right outside my back window here. It's beautifully done. The East Hampton Garden Club installs and maintains that. But it's a little bit out of the way, so the general public might see it briefly as they drive in, but they don't get to closely inspect it because there's no sidewalk there and there's really no reason for people to walk over to this part of the campus. So having it right in front of Town Hall where everybody coming and going gets a chance to opportunity to see it, and there can be, great opportunity for education. So I'm excited that we're back on track with that. Priorities are starting to shift now that COVID's finally easing up. And so I look forward to seeing some further advancement on that. I'll just reiterate it again, because we, again, are looking for your comments about the airport, about proposed rules and regs, about things that we should consider, possible impacts of any actions that we might take, or steps that the public think we should take. We're not looking so much for complaints as we are for constructive comments to help guide our future decision-making process. This is a requirement under New York State Environmental Quality Review Act that we have this scoping session and take comments from the public. Again, those comments may be emailed to the town board at ehamptonscope@ehamptonny.gov. And we'll take those comments through Friday, March 18th, 4 p.m. Sylvia did mention the police reform committee, which basically put together a re-envisioning plan for our local police as mandated by New York State. And one of those steps includes the formation of a community review board. And that committee has been, voted on and adopted through resolution. We had our first meeting. It was a very good meeting. We took the opportunity to get to know each other a little bit and go over a basic outline of the different things that the committee is charged with accomplishing. And essentially, the most important aspect is really for the community review board to monitor the progress that we have in achieving the objectives and goals of the plan. And that includes better communication and outreach to the public, better understanding, and a whole series of metrics. The police department, Chief Sarlo, is in the process of completing his annual review for 2021. And a number of the issues that are mentioned in the plan will be updated, and progress will be noted on those topics. We will be meeting again in another month to review that plan. I think he'll have the report done by then, and we'll have a chance to review it, make suggestions, and focus on what still needs to be done. And that covers my liaison report. We have a few resolutions to offer, and I think, Kate, you're the first.
Yes, thank you. The first resolution is 2022-349, and that's a modification to 2022-327. And that's where the town board approved the prior resolution for costs associated with the survey of the Army Corps of Engineers downtown Montauk Beach replenishment project site to determine the quantity of sand required for compliance with the operational management agreement. And the town retained Robert H. Fox, DBA Sea Level Mapping, to perform the required survey of downtown Montauk, and would like to include the option to survey Ditch Plains Beach to determine the quantity of sand needed to maintain use of the beach through the 2022 season. And so it is resolved that the firm of Robert H. Fox at Sea Level Mapping is retained to perform the required surveys for downtown Montauk, and additionally Ditch Plains Beach as proposed, and with total cost not to exceed $6,000 for both locations, and resolve that Robert Fox is hereby retained to perform the required survey for downtown Montauk and Ditch Plains beaches.
Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Aye, passed and carried.
And my second resolution is 2022-350. This is a 2022 budget modification for the Highway Department. And the Highway Department needs to cover supply expenses for excessive snow removal and icing due to the recent severe storms. The 2022 budget lines are exhausted, and additional funding will be needed to cover the remainder of the season. So it is resolved that the town board, at the request of the highway superintendent, directs the budget office to make the following budget modifications, and that's to take $40,000 from the road surfacing material budget line and move it to the same $40,000 to snow removal supplies.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, pass and carry. Resolution 351 is to authorize attendance at the New York State GFOA 2022 conference. Resolved that Najib Valeria is hereby authorized to attend New York State Government Finance Officers Association annual conference from April 6th through April 8th at a cost not to exceed $775.
Second.
Sorry, second, yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passed and carried. We do have items to discuss in exec session.
I make a motion, we go into exec for personnel, for real estate purchase, for outside agreements and advice of counsel.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passed and carried. Shall we reconvene at 3:15, 3 o'clock? What do you think?
3:15, okay.
3:15 is perfect.
3:15? Okay, very good. I'll send out the link shortly.
All right,
Thanks
thank
very
you.
much, everyone. Stay safe and be